Chapter 22 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Marie Christian. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. GALORS CONQUAESTOR. Prosper's aim on leaving High March, after his guests of arms, had been GOLTRES, for there he had believed to find GALORS. But GALORS was a man of affairs, just now, who had gone far since Iseult overheard his plans. His troop of some 60 spears had grown like the avalanche it resembled. For what the avalanche does not crush, it turns to crushing. GALORS' harrying had won harriers. In fact, he headed within a fortnight of his coming into North Morgrant, a force which was the largest known, since Earl Roger of Belesme had made a quietness like death over those parts. By the time of Prosper's exodus, that is by mid-May, his tactical situation was this. It is as well to be precise. He had HAUTERIVE and Weisford. GOLTRES was in the hollow of his hand. If he could get WANMEETING, he would be master of the whole of the North Forest, west of Wan. Here would be enormous advantage. By a forced march and a night surprise, he might get Market Basing, on the east side of the river. And if he did that, he would cut the Countess of HAUTERIVE practically off the whole of Morgrant. Going further, so far as to cut her off March, whence she drew her supplies, she would be at his mercy. He could pin her in High March like a sheep, and make such terms as a sheep and a butcher were likely to arrange. For, strategically, North Morgrant would be his. With that to the good, South Morgrant could await his leisure. The key will show how the HAUTERIVE Saltire stood with the GALORS Pale. Now the whole of this pretty scheming was based upon one simple supposed fact, that the Countess's daughter was then actually in her mother's castle. GALORS knew quite well that he could not hold Morgrant indefinitely, without the lady. Even Morgrant was part of the kingdom, and though rumor of the king's troubles came down, with wild talk of Aiguardente from the north and Badetort from the southwest, combining to slaughter their sovereign, the king's writ would continue to run through the king, that writ it were under the earth. It was unlikely that a shire would be let fall to a nameless outlaw, when 500 men out of Kingshold could keep it where it was. But a name would come by marriage as well as by birth. All his terms with his penned countess would have been amnesty and the heiress. At first he prospered in everything he undertook. Weisford and HAUTERIVE were under garrisoned, and fell. GOLTRES, very remote, was unimportant except as a base. The Countess at this time, if not engaged philandering with Prosper, was troubled on the northern borders. As a matter of fact, GALORS had been able to secure that no messengers to High March should cross Wan, and that none from it, having once crossed, should ever recross. This was the state of affairs when Prosper passed the edge of the High March domains and took the road for WANMEETING and GOLTRES. He had not gone far out of the Countess's borders before he saw what had happened. The country had been wasted by fire and sword, cottages burnt out, trampled gardens, green cornlands black and bruised, desolation everywhere, but no life. Death he did come upon. In one cottage he saw 2 children dead and bound together in the doorway. At a forewent way, a man and woman hung from an ash tree. Of a farmstead the 4 walls stood, with a fire yet burning in the rickyard. In the duck pond before the house the bodies of the owners were floating amid the scum of green weed. That night he slept by a roadside shrine, and next morning betimes took the lonely track again. Considering all this as he rode, he reached a signpost which told him that here the ways of WANMEETING and Weisford parted company. WANMEETING is my plain road, thought he, but plainer still is that of GALORS, and not of GALORS alone. I think the longer going is like to be my shorter. I will go to Waysford." He did so. After a patch of woodland was a sandy stretch of road, fringed with heather and a few pines. A man was sitting here, by whose side lay his dead young wife, with a handkerchief over her face. Prosper asked him what all this misery meant, for at High March, he added, they had no conception of it. The man turned his gaunt eyes upon him. "We call it the hand of God, sir." "Do you, though? I see only the hand of man or the devil," said Prosper. "May be you in the right, Messire. Only we think that if God is almighty, he might stay all this havoc if he would. And since he stays it not, we say he winks at it, which is as good as a nod any day." "You are out, sir," said Prosper. "As I read, God hath given men wits, and suffers the devil in order that they may prove them. If they fail in the test, and of two ways choose the wrong, is God to be blamed? Some of us have no such choice. It is hard that the battle of wits should be over our acres, and that our skulls should be cracked to prove which of them to be the tougher. God is mighty enough to make laws, and too mighty to break them, as I understand the matter," said Prosper. "But who, under God or devil, hath done this wrong?" "Sir," said the man, "it is the Lord of HAUTERIVE, so styled, who hath taken Waysford and destroyed it with the country for 10 miles round about it, and killed all the women who could not run fast enough, and such of the men as did not run to him. And this he did upon the admirable conceit that the men, having no women of their own, would take pains that they should not be singular in the country, but full of lessons in butchery, would become butchers themselves. It seems that there was ground for the opinion. As for me, I should certainly have been killed had he found me, for butchering is not to my taste, or was not then. But I was on a journey, and came back to find my house in ashes, and my new wife, what you see." "But who," cried Prosper, "in the name of the true Lord, is your Lord of HAUTERIVE? And how dare he take upon himself the style and fee of the Countess of HAUTERIVE, Belesme, and March? I have no reason to love that lady, but I thought all Morgrant was hers." "Morgrant is hers, and HAUTERIVE, and all the country from March unto Wanmouth," said the countryman. "But this lord is an outlaw who was once a monk down at Malbank in the south, and hath renounced his flock and gathered together a crew as unholy as himself. And the story goes that he did it all for the sake of a girl who scorned him. Now then he holdeth HAUTERIVE as his tower of strength, has harried Waysford, and threatens WANMEETING town, giving out that he will edge in the lady, besiege High March itself, wed the countess, and have the girl, when he finds her, as his concubine. So he will be lord of all, and God of no account so far as I can see. And the name of this almighty scamp, Messire, is GALORS de Born," put in Prosper. The countryman got up and faced him. "Are you a fellow of his?" he asked. "For look you, though I must die for it, I will die killing." "Friend," Prosper said gently, "the man is my enemy, whom I had thought disabled longer by a split throat which he got of me. I see I have yet to deal with him. Tell me now where he is." "I can tell you no more," said the fellow, "than that his tower is in HAUTERIVE. He hath guards along the river and a post at Waysford. We shall have trouble to cross the water. He is said to be for WANMEETING, but I know he has High March in his eye, because the girl he wants is believed to be there. He has been here also, as you see. God damn him." "God hath damned him," said Prosper, "but the work is in my hands." "You will need more than your hands for the business, my gentleman. He hath 500 spears. The battle is between his and mine, nevertheless. Then there is the Golden Knight, as they call him, come from hell knows where, not a fighter but a schemer, and swift, my word, and cruel as the cold. Will you tackle him?" "I shall indeed," said Prosper. "Farewell, I am for my luck at Waysford." "I would come with you if I might," said the man slowly. Come then, 2 go better than 1 against 500. Let me bury my pretty dead, and I am yours, Messire. Ah, I will help you there if I may, Prosper replied. They dug a shallow grave and laid in it the body of the young girl. Prosper never saw her face, nor did her husband dare to look again on what he had covered up. Prosper said the prayers, but the other lay on his face on the grass and got up tearless. Then they set off. 5 miles below Waysford, they swam the river without any trouble from GALORS outposts. A wary canter over turf brought them to the flank of the hill. They climbed it, and from the top could see the Wan Valley and what should be the town. It was a heap of stones, scorched and shapeless. The church tower still stood for a mockery. Its conical cap of shingles had fallen in. Its vanes stuck out at an angle. Prosper, whose eyes were good, made out a flagstaff pointing the perpendicular. It had a flag, Parti Propel, Argent and Sable. A dun smoke hung over the litter. We shall do little good there, said he. We are some days too late. We will try WANMEETING. Agreed. They fetched a wide detour to the northwest, climbed the long ridge of rock which binds HAUTERIVE to the place of their election, and made way along the overside of it, taking to cover as much as they could. By 6 o'clock in the evening, they were as near as they dared to be until nightfall. As they stood, they could see the ridge rear its ragged head to watch over the cleft wherethrough the 2 Wans raced to be free. Upon the slope of this bluff was the town itself, a walled town the color of the bare rock, with towers and belfries. The westering sun threw the whole into warmth and mellow light. The Saltire still floats, cried Prosper. We are not too late for this time. They were let in at dusk by the Martin Gate, not without some parley. The only word Prosper would give had been death to GALORS de Born. This did not happen to be the right word. Matters were not to be adjusted either by life to the Countess, for Prosper did not happen to wish it her. The High Bailiff and the Jurats argued at some length whether what he had said did not imply the other of necessity. If you talk of necessity, gentlemen, finally said the High Bailiff, in my advice it is written that our necessity is too fine for dialectic. Our present need is to kill the common enemy. Here is a gentleman who asks for no other pleasure. Let him in. And they did. Prosper was in love at last, but he did not lose his head on that account. It was not his way. The girl he had first pitied, next desired, then respected, then learned, finally adored, was gone. Well, he would find her, no doubt. She had but 2 enemies, GALORS and Malfrey, who hunted in couple just now. She might be anywhere in the world, but it was most likely that where she was they were also. If he found them, he should find her. That was why, without having any desire to befriend the Countess, who had in his judgment made a fool of herself first and an enemy of him afterwards, he undertook the defenses of WANMEETING. For it came to that. He found a thin garrison, a pompous bailiff, wordy and precise, head-boroughs without heads, and a panic-stricken horde of shopkeepers with things to lose, who spent the day in crying, "Danger!" and the night in drinking beer. Outside, somewhere, was an enemy who might be a rascal, but was certainly a man. Professional honor was touched on a raw. Since he was in God's name let him do something. After a day spent in observing the manners and customs of WANMEETING in a state of semi-siege, he got very precise ideas of what they were likely to be in a whole one. He called on the High Bailiff and spoke his mind. "Bailiff," he said very quietly, "your defenses are not good, but they are too good to defend nothing. I am sorry I cannot put your citizens at a higher figure. There does not seem to me to be a man among them. They chatter like pies, they drink like fishes, they herd like sheep, they scream like gulls. They love their wives and children, but so do rabbits. They are snug at home, but so are pigs in a sty. They say many prayers, they give alms to the poor, but no prayers will ever stay GALORS, and the alms your people want I spell with an R. I know Master GALORS, and he me. If he comes here, the town will be carried, the men hanged, the women ravished, and I shall be killed like a rat in a drain. Now I set little store by my life, but I and the man I have brought with me intend to die in the open. Do what you choose, but understand that unless things alter to my liking, I take myself, my sword, and my head for affairs into the country." "And who are you, Messire, and what do I know of your head for affairs?" cried the High Bailiff on his dignity. "My name is Prosper Legay, at your service," the youth replied, "and as for my head, it becomes me not to speak." "If you will not speak of it, why are you here?" asked the High Bailiff, at the mercy of his logic. "I am here, sir, for the purpose of killing Dame GALORS de Bourne." "You speak very confidently, young gentleman. There is no boasting where there is no doubt. Is there no doubt, pray, whether he might kill you?" "I intend to remove that doubt," said Prosper. "Pray how, sir?" "By killing him first." The end of it all was that the High Bailiff, in the presence of the jurats and citizens, solemnly girt on Prosper the sword of the borough, and declared Messire Prosper Legay of Starning to be generalissimo of its forces. Prosper at once paraded the garrison. He rated the men roundly, flogged 2 of them with his own hand for some small insubordination, and made fast friends in all ranks. Having established a pleasant relationship by these simple means, he spoke to them as follows. "Gentlemen," he said, "have the goodness to remark that I have taught you how to parade. In time, I doubt not you will follow me with as good a will as you have hitherto followed your own devices. These, I take leave to tell you, were very foolish. If you follow me, I shall lead you in the thick of the fighting, should there be any. If you leave me, or if I have the honor to be killed, you will all have your throats cut. I do not mean to be killed, gentlemen, and rely upon you in the alternative which remains." He took a guard and went the round of the defenses. Wherever he went, he brought heart with him. As for the burgesses and the burgesses' wives, they thought him a god. The result was that in 6 weeks he had half the place under arms, a fighting force of 1,000 pikes and 500 archers, an outer wall of defense 10 feet by 6, and provision to stand a 2-month siege. This brought the time to July. On July 14th, one of his scouts brought home the news that GALORS had concentrated on HAUTERIVE, while keeping close watch along WAN. He himself was no one knew where, scouring the country for traces of the girl Iseult la Desirous, who had escaped from High March. Meantime, a detached force under the Golden Knight had surprised GOLTRES and put the inhabitants to the sword. They held that stronghold, and were said still to be there. Prosper sent for his horse, and rode down to the council house to see the High Bailiff. "Bailiff," he said, "GALORS will not be here yet a while. If he comes, you will know what to do. But I do not think he will come just yet." "Ah, messire, will you desert us?" cried the good soul. "If you put it so, yes." "You are tired of warfare, messire?" "Warfare, pardieu! I am tired of no warfare. I am going to make some for default of it." "And leave us all here?" "And leave you all here." "Would you have us assume the offensive, sir?" "By no means, bailiff. I would have you mind your walls. But forgive me, I must be off." "Where are you going, messire?" "I am going to find GALORS, or at least those who will save me the trouble." "Adieu, bailiff." Prosper galloped away as if the devil were in him. The High Bailiff assumed command. End of chapter 22.
Chapter 23 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joe Selah. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. FALVE the Charcoal Burner. While Prosper is galloping after Dame Galors, and Dame Galors is galloping after Iseult, let us turn to that unconscious lady who hides her limbs in a pair of ragged breeches and her bloom under the grime of coal dust. Her cloud of hair, long now and lustrous, out of all measure to her pretense, she was accustomed to shorten by doubling it under her cap. An odd fancy had taken her which prevented a second shearing. If Prosper loved her, she dared not go unlovely any more. Her hair curtained her when she bathed in the brook and the sun. Beyond doubt it was beautiful. It was Prosper's. She must keep it untouched. This gave her an infinity of bother, but at the same time an infinity of delight. She took pride in it, observed its rate of growth very minutely. Another fancy was, that, before it reached her knees, she should give it with all herself to its master. It is so easy to confuse desires with gratifications, and hopes with accomplishments, that you will not be surprised if I go on to say that she soon made the growth of her hair data by which to calculate her restoration to his side. She was to have a rude awakening, as you shall judge. The July heat lays over the forest like a pall, stilled all the leaves, and beat upon the parched ground. Iseult, seduced by the water and her joy to be alone with her ring, audacious too by use, took longer leave. So long leave she took one day that it became a question of dinner. The one solemn hour of the 24-hour was in peril. FALVE was sent to find her, and took his stick. But he never used it, for he found, not Roy indeed, but Roy's rags on the brookside, and over the brook on the high bank a lady, veiled only in her hair, singing to herself. He stood transported, acting in his own despite, then softly withdrew. Roy got back in his time, cooked the dinner, and had no drubbing. Then came the meal with an ominous innovation. They sat in a ring on the grass round an iron pot. Each had a fork with which he fished for himself. Down came FALVE, smirking, and sat himself by Iseult. He had a flower in his hand. "I plucked this for my mistress," says he, "but failing her, I give it to my master." She had to take it with a sick smile. She had a sicker heart. The horrid play went on. FALVE grinned and shrugged like a Frenchman. He fed her with his fork. "Eat of this, my minion." Forced his cup to her lips. "Drink, honey, where I have drunk." He drank deep and, blinking like a night-bird, said solemnly, "We have called you, Jack, to our shame. Your name shall properly be called Roy, for you should be a king." The men made merry over this comedy, finding appetite for it. But to the girl came back that elfin look she had almost lost since she had known Prosper. She had worn it the night she came plump on GALORS, but never since. Now again hers were a hare's eyes, wide and quaking. From that hour her peace left her, for FALVE never did. Escape was impossible. The man eyed her as a cat a mouse, and seemed to play upon her nerve as if she had been a fine instrument. He became astonishingly subtle, dealt in images like a modern poet, had the same art of meaning more than he had said to those who had the misfortune to understand him. He never declared what he knew, though she could not but guess it, did not betray her to the others, seemed to enjoy the equivoque, content to wait. So he kept her on tender hooks. She felt a cheat, and what is worse, a detected cheat. This filled her deep with shame. It made her more coy and more a prude than she had ever need to be had she gone among them curdled and coiffed. At last came the day when that happened which she had darkly dreaded. A load of coals went off to market basing. To dinner came herself only, and FALVE. She trembled and could neither eat nor drink. FALVE made amends, ate for 3 and drank for 12. He grew sportive anon. He sang tavern songs, ventured on heavy play, would pinch her ear or her cheek, must have her sit on his knee. But at this her fortitude gave way. She jumped up to shake herself free. There was a short tussle. Her cap fell off, and all the dusky curtain of her hair about her shoulders ran rippling to her middle. No concealment could avail between them now. She stood a maid confessed, by her looks confessing, who watched him guardedly with her lips a-quiver. FALVE did not hesitate to take her hand. "Come and see," he said, and led her away. Across the brook he showed her a butt newly made, covered with green boughs, his work. It appeared under the cover of a week of sweating nights. He led her in. She saw all his simple preparations, the new stamped floor, the new joisted roof, a great bed in the corner. Then he turned to her and said, Your name is not Roy, but Royne, and you shall be queen of me, and of the green wood, and of this bed. Iseult began to shake so violently that she could hardly stand. How, does not the prospect please you? Said FALVE. She could only plead for time. Time? Asked he. Time for what? There is time for all in the forest. Moreover, you have had time. Would you have me wed you, FALVE? She faltered. Why, I set no store by your church music myself, rejoined FALVE. But I set great store by Holy Church. You would never dishonor me, FALVE. My dear, said FALVE, you will have guessed by now that I am a lady's man. I am wax in their pretty hands, red wax or white wax. According as you squeeze me, my dear, you made me a Goliath or a bishop, as you wish. You would have me a bishop, eh? I do not understand, FALVE. The husband of one wife, my lass, as the Scripture saith. Is that your fancy? I would like to be a wife. Then a wife you shall be, my honey, though a friend or a bondmaid is equally good Scripture, to say nothing of simplicity. Now that being settled, and a bargain, let us seal. She escaped with his tarnish on her hand, but he respected her promise, and troubled her no more by contact. Nevertheless she had to pay. His dwarfish propensity to wit led him the wildest lengths. The rogue began to sigh and gesture and slap his ribs. He affected the lover preposterously. He was overweary of his rough life, he would say. He must marry and settle down in the hut by the brook. And then, he ran on, though, Roy shalt come and live there, serving me and my wife. For I love thee, boy, and will not leave thee. And I warrant that she will not be jealous when I play with thee, nor shall I grudge thy love of her. Nay, not if thou shalt love her as myself. For thus Moses bade us in the commandments, and so on. By St. Christopher, that long man of God, he swore at another bout, though and my wife shall sleep in one bed, and I not be dishonored. The other men began to prick up their ears at these speeches, and looked shrewdly at their boy more than once. As for Iseult, she knew not where to turn. She seemed to be quavering over an abyss. Meantime, the hour of her wedding, as FALVE had appointed it, drew near. In middle July the whole gang were to go to HAUTERIVE with coal for the castle. FALVE's mother, I have told you, lived there in a little huckster's shop she had. FALVE's plan was to harbor Iseult there for the night, and wed her on the morrow, as early as might be. But he told the girl nothing of all this. They set out, then, betimes in the morning, and by travelling late and early, reached HAUTERIVE in 2 days, and this in spite of the weather, which was cold and stormy. The town stands high on the hither shoulder of that ridge which ends at WANMEETING, but by reason of the dense growth of timber in that walk of the forest, you do not get a view of it from below until you are actually under the walls. Iseult, who had no reason to be interested in any but her own affairs just then, and was, moreover, wet through and shivering, did not notice a flag flying over the castle, party per pale argent and sable. It was not till the whole caravan stood within the drawbridge that she saw over the portcullis an escutcheon whereon were the redoubtable 3 white wicket gates with the legend, Entra per me. She realized then that she was being drawn into the trap teeth of her grim enemy, and went rather gray. There was nothing for it. She must trust to her disguise. It had deceived the colliers. It might deceive GALORS. Ah, but there was Malfrey. It would never deceive her. All the comfort she could take was that GALORS was the lord of the town, and she collier's knave. Now colliers' knaves do not see much of their lords paramount, nor rulers of cities look into the love affairs of colliers, or seek for such among them. If Malfrey were there, heaven help her, but she began to think she might cope with GALORS. When the asses were unloaded in the inn-yard, and the coal stacked under cover, FALVE took his prisoner by the hand and led her by many winding lanes to his mother's shop. This was in Litany Row, a crazy dark entry over against the Dominican convent. The streets and alleys were empty. The rain coursed down all the gutters of the steep little town. Its music and their own plashy steps were all they could hear. Knocking at a little barred door in Litany Row, they were admitted by a wrinkled old woman with wet eyes. "Mother," said the fellow, "this boy is no boy, but a maid with whom I intend to marry at cockcrow. Let her sleep with thee this night, and in the morning dress her in a good gown against I come to fetch her." The old woman looked her up and down in a way that made the girl blush. "Well," she said, "thou art a proper boy enough, I see, and I will make thee a proper girl, if God hath done his part." "That he hath done, mother," said FALVE with a grin. "See here, then." With that he pulls off Iseult's green cap. All her hair tumbled about her shoulders in a fan. "Mother of God!" cried the old woman, "this is a proper girl indeed, if other things are as they should be, to accord with these tresses." "Never fear for that, mother," said FALVE. "Trust me, she will be a good wife out and in. For, let alone the good looks of the girl, she is very meek and doeth all things well, even to speaking little." "And what is she named, this pretty miss?" asked the crone. "Tell her your fancy name, wife," said FALVE, giving her a nudge. "Show her that you have a tongue in your round head." "I am called Assault la Desirous, ma'am," said the girl. "La la la!" cried the old dame. "Say you so? The name hath promise of plenty, but for whose good I say not. And who gave you such a name as that, pray?" "I have never known any other, ma'am." "Hum, hum," mumbled the dame. "I've heard more Christian names and names less Christian, but never one that went better on a bride." "Mother, a word in your ear," said FALVE. The couple drew apart, and the man whispered, "Keep her close. Let her never out of your sight, that I may marry her tomorrow. For since I set eyes on her as a maiden whom I first took to be a boy, I have had no peace for longing after her." "Have no fear, my son FALVE," said his mother. "She shall be as safe with me as a stone in a peach. I'll get her dry in her natural shape to begin with, and come morning light, if you have not the comeliest bride in Norwest Walk, 'twill be the church's doing or yours, but none of mine. Have ye feed a priest, boy?" "Why, no," said the fellow. "Seek out Father Bonacard of the New Grey Friars. 'Tis the happiest-go-lucky, ruddiest rogue of a priest that ever hand-fasted a couple. He'll wed ye and housel ye for a couple of roses. Footnote: silver coins of those parts, worth about 3 shillings apiece. The Black Friars'll take 3 off ye, and tie ye with a sour face at that. Bonacord's the man, Brother Bonacord of the Great Brothers, hard by Botchergate." "Bonacard forever!" roared FALVE. He blew a kiss to his wife and went off on his errand. End of chapter 23. Recording by Joe Selah.
Section 24 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 24. Secret Things at HAUTERIVE. The first thing the old lady did was to go to an oak chest which was in the room and rummage there. With many grunts and wheezes, for she was eaten with rheumatism, she drew out a bundle done up in an old shawl. This she opened upon the floor. "I belonged to a great lady once," said she, "though I don't look like it, my dear. These fal lols have been over as dainty a body as your own in their day, and that was 15 years ago to a tick. She gave 'em all to me when she took to the black, and now they shall go to my son's wife. Think of that, you who come from who knows who or where. If they fit you not like a glove, let me eat 'em." There were silks and damasks and brocades, webbed tissues of the East, Koan gauzes, blue and green, Damascus purples, shot gold from Samarcand, crimson stuffs dipped in Syrian vats, rose-colored silk from Trebizond, and embroidered jackets which smelt of Cairo or Baghdad, and glowed with the hues of Byzantium itself. Out of these she made choice. The girl shed her rags, and stood up at last in a gown of thin red silk, which from throat to ankle clung close about her shape. The dark beauty went imperially robed. "Wait a bit," said her dresser. "We'll look at you presently when you're shod and coiffed to fit." She gave her a pair of red stockings and Moorish slippers for her feet. She massed up her black hair into a tower upon her head and roped it about with a chain of sequins which had served their last chaffer at Venice. She girt a belt of filigree gold and turquoise about her waist, gave her a finishing pat, and stood out to spy at her. "Eh, eh, there you go for a jolly gentlewoman," she chuckled, and kissed her. "Give you a pair of sloe black eyes for your violets, tip your nails with henna red, and you'd be a mate for the Sultan of Babylon in his glory. As you stand, you're my bonny Countess Belle, warmed in the blood, as she might have been if Bartlemy had had no vigil that one year." They sat to table and ate together. The old dame grew very friendly, and as usual with her class showed a spice of malice. "There is one here, let me tell you," she said as she munched her bacon, "even the lord of this town, who would be glad to know his way to Litany Row before morning." Iseult paled and watched her unconscious host. She knew that much already. "Yes, yes," she went on, "the old ruminant, he hath a rare twist for women, if they speak the truth who know him. There is one he hath hunted high and low, in forest and out, they say, and hath made himself a lord for her sake, whereas he was but a stalled ox in Malbank cloister. He hath made himself a lord, and killed his hundreds of honest men, and now he hath lost her. Heh! The good woman chuckled at her thoughts over all this irony of events. "I might do son FALVE a sorry turn," she pursued, "if I would. I should get paid for it, minted money, and St. Mary knows how little of that has come my way of late. And I dare say that you would not take the exchange for robbery, a lord for a smutty collier." She looked slyly at Iseult as she spoke. The girl's eyes, wide with fear, made her change her tune. If the daughter-elect were loyal, loyalty beseemed the mother. "What?" she quavered. "You're all for love and the man of your heart, then? Well, well, I like you for it, child." Iseult's heart began to knock at her ribs. "Can I trust her? Can I trust her?" she thought, and her heart beat back. Trust her, trust her, trust her. With bedtime came her chance. The old woman, whose geniality never endangered her shrewdness, bid the girl undress and get into bed first. The meek beauty obeyed. She was undressed, but not in bed, when there came a rain of knocks at the door. "Slip into bed, child, slip into bed," cried the other. "That's a man at the door." Iseult, half dead with fright, once more obeyed. The knocking continued till the door was opened. "Who are you, in the name of Jesus?" said the woman, trembling. "Jesus be my witness, I come in his name. I'm Brother Bonacor," said the man without. "Save you, Father," the woman replied, "but you cannot come in this night. There's a naked maid in the room." Iseult's plight was pitiable. She could do absolutely nothing but stay where she was. She dared not so much as cry out. "If she's a maid, it is very well," said Brother Bonacor, "but I'm quite sure she's not." "Hey day, what's this?" cried Falve's mother, highly scandalized. "Listen to me, Dame Ursula," the friar went on with a wagging finger. "Your son came with gossip of a marriage he was to make with a certain Iseult." "'Tis so indeed, Father. Iseult la Desirous is her name, a most sweet maid. No maiden at all, good woman, but a wife of my own making." "Ah, joys of Mary, what is this?" "Ask her, mistress, ask her." "I shall ask her, never you fear. Stay you there, Father, for your life." "Trust me, ma'am." Dame Ursula went straight up to the bed and whipped off the blankets. There cowered the girl. "Tell me the sober truth, by all the pains of dies irae," whispered her hostess. "Are you a maiden or none?" It was a shrewd torment that, double forked. To deny was infamy, to affirm ruin. However, there was no escape from it. Iseult had never been a learned liar. "I am a maid, ma'am," she said in a whisper. "Cover yourself warm, my lamb, I'll twist 'em," said the delighted mother. She went quickly to the door. "May our Lord the Holy Pope of Rome find you mercy, Father," she vowed, "but you will find none here. The girl has testified against you. Now will you marry him?" "That I will not, by our Lord," replied the friar. "There's infamy abroad, and I'll leave it, for it's none of my making. I wish you good night, mistress. Bid your son to the Black Brothers. St. Dominic may deal with him. St. Francis was a clean man, and so must we be clean." "Then get ye clean tongues, lest ye lick others foul, ye brown viper," screamed Mrs. Ursula as he splashed down the kennel. Iseult was desperate, but luck pointed her one road yet. You will remember the trinkets round her neck. Prosper's ring was one. The other was that which old Malt had felt for and found safe in her bosom on her wedding night. When, therefore, Mrs. Ursula came bridling into the light full of her recent victory, she saw the girl before her trembling and holding out a gold chain at a stretch. "Lord's name, child, you'll catch your death," cried she. "Slip on your nightgown and into the bed." Trust her now, went Iseult's wild heart. "Not yet, mother," said she. "You must hear me now." Ursula dropped into a chair. Iseult knelt before her and put the ring in her old hand. "Mother, look at this ring," she began, out of breath already. and look at me, and then let me go. For with this ring I was wed a year ago to a certain lord whom I love dearly, and to whom I have never yet come as a wife. So what I told you was true, and what the Grey Friar told you was true also, when he said that I was a wife of his wedding. He wed me to my lord sure and fast to save me from a hanging. But not for love of me was I taken by my husband, and not for desire of his to mate his soul to mine. But for the love of the love I bore him, I dared not let him come, even when he would have come. We have been a year wedded, and many days and nights we have wandered the forest and dwelt together here and there, until now by some fate we are put apart. But I know we shall come together again, and he whom I love so bitterly shall set the ring in its place again where he first put it, and himself lie where now it lies, and so the wound and the pain I have shall be at last assuaged, and love, who had struck me so deep, shall crown me. So said Iseult, kneeling and crying. Whatever else she may have touched in her who listened, she touched her curiosity. The old woman dropped the ring to look at the girl. True enough, below her left breast there was a small red wound, and upon it a drop of fresh blood. Mrs. Ursula took the wet face between her two chapped hands and laughed at it, not unkindly. "My bonny lass," said she, "if this be all thou hast to tell me, it will not stay my son Falve. Here in this forest we think little of the giving of rings, but much of what should follow it. But thy wedding stopped at the ringing. From what I can learn, that is no wedding at all. Doubt not this knight of thine will never return. They never do return, my lassie. Neither doubt but that Falve will wed thee faster than any ring can do. And as for thy scratch and crying heart, my child, trust Falve again to stanch the one and still the other. For that is a man's way. And now get into bed, child, it grows late." There was nothing for it but to obey. Her game had been played and had failed. She got into bed, and Ursula followed. Then, as she lay there quaking, crying quietly to herself, her heart's message went on that bid her trust. Trust! What could she trust? The thought shaped itself and grew clearer every minute, the answer pealing in her brain. The token! She recalled her mother's words, the only words she had spoken on her marriage night. "It shall not fail thee, to whomsoever thou shalt show it." "Help, Saint Isidore," she breathed, and sat up in the bed. This made the old woman very cross. "Drat the girl," she muttered, "why don't she sleep while she can?" Iseult leaned over and put the token in her hand. "Look also at this token, mother, before we sleep," she said. Mrs. Ursula, grumbling and only half awake, took the thing in one hand and hoisted herself with the other. She sat up, peered at it in the light of the cresset, dropped it to rub her eyes, fumbled for it again, and peered again. She whispered prayers to herself and adjurations, called on Christ and Christ's mother, vehemently crossed herself many times, scrambled out of bed, and plumped down beside it on her two knees. "Mild Mary," she quavered, "mild Mary, that is enough. That I should live to see this day. O saints in glory, let us look at it again." Iseult drooped over the edge of the bed. Ursula looked and was astounded. She wondered and prayed. She laughed and cried. Iseult grew frightened. "Wed her?" cried the old dame in ecstasy. "Wed the Queen of Sheba next?" Then she grew mighty serious. She got up and dropped a curtsy. "It is enough, princess. He dare not look at you again. At dawn you shall leave this place. Now sleep easy, for if I hurt a hair of your head I might never hope for heaven's gate." She made the girl sleep alone. "This is my proper station before you, madam," said she, and lay down on the floor at the foot of the bed. It was no dream. In the morning she was up before the light. Iseult found a bath prepared, and in her jailer of overnight, a dresser who was as brisk as a bee and as humble as a spaniel. "Old servants are the best," said the crone in her defence. "They're not so slippery, but they know how things should go on and off. Ah, and give me a young mistress and a beauty," she went on to sigh, "such as God Almighty hath sent me this night." Either Saint Isidore had entered the token, or the token had been swallowed by Saint Isidore. When the girl was dressed in her red silk gown of the night before, with a hood of the same for her head, her red stockings and her red shoes, she was set at table and waited upon hand and foot. No questions were asked, but very much was taken for granted. Ursula had her finger to her lip every sentence. She wallowed in mystery. "You're not safe here, princess," she whispered, "but I will put you where only safety is for the moment. in Mid-Morgaunt. Affairs, as you know, are not well where they should be, but as soon as you are bestowed, I will go forth with that which will make them as bright as day. I will see one I never thought to face again. I shall win honour, which God knows I am late a winning. Leave everything to me." Iseult asked nothing better, for the very sufficient reason that she knew nothing. Her earth-born habit of taking all things as they came in order stood her in good part. She had no temptation to ask what all this meant, but she did not forget to thank the great Saint Isidore latent in the crystal. Everything being ready, the old woman threw a long brown cloak over her charge before they ventured out into the still twilight streets. The wet was steaming off the ground, but the day promised fair. HAUTERIVE was nearly empty. They were not challenged at the gate, met nobody terrific. Once outside the walls, they descended a sharp incline, struck almost immediately a forest path, and in half an hour from that they were deep in the dewy woods. Old Ursula held on briskly for a mile or so in and out of fern and brake. Then she stopped, out of breath, but beaming benevolence and humility. "We're safe enough now, madam," she said, and went on to explain. "Hold you by that path, princess, until beech and holly and oaks begin. Follow the dip of the land, you'll come to thorny hold brush. With those you'll find there you may stay until you know who shall send for you. That may be likely a week or more, for I'm not so young as I would be, and the roads are thick with Galordians. Now kiss me quickly, if you will stoop so low. It is the last time I shall ask it of you." Iseult thanked her with sparkling eyes and warm red lips. Then she stood alone in the wood watching her old friend go. Afterwards she herself took to the path, wondering, but light-hearted and minded to run. The spruce FALVE, curled and anointed for the bridal, found no wife, but his mother, who called him a fool, a knave, a notorious evil liver and contemner of holy persons. This was hard to bear, for part of it at least he knew to be quite true. What was harder was, that hitherto he had always believed his mother of his party. But there's no pietist like your reformed rake, so FALVE left the huckster's shop vowing vengeance. The day was July 18, and all the town astir, for Galore de Born and his riders were just in from a raid. End of chapter 24, read by Sandra, near Montreal, 2021.
Chapter 25 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott McKinley. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 25. Chapter 25. The Road to GOLTRES. On July 14, Prosper left one meeting at a gallop, in the driving rain. There had been thunder and a change in the weather, the roads were heavy and the brooks brimming, but by noon he was in the plain, and by night at One Ash, a lonely dead tree as often gallows as not. There he slept in his cloak. Next morning he was early in the saddle, and had reached the fringe of Quatre Heath by breakfast time, if the hour without the thing can be called by such a comfortable name. He knew there was a crossroad somewhere nearby from Quatre to HAUTERIVE town. He should go warily, for if the first were invested, there must needs be communications with the base, which was HAUTERIVE. Sure enough, he had not seen the finger post before he saw the pikes. There were 3 mounted men there, one of whom had his face to the north, and was shading his eyes to spy over the heath. In a dozen more strides, for he was at no pains to skulk, from 3 troopers, a man saw him, gave a shout, and spurred over the heather. Prosper pulled his horse into a gallop, resolved to bring things to a quick conclusion. Spear in rest, he came down on his fellow like a gale of wind. The man swerved at the onset. Prosper rocketed into him. Horse and man went over in a heap. "Bungler!" cried Prosper, and went on. The other 2 faced him together, standing. Prosper drove in between them, and had one of them off at the cost of a snapped spear. He turned on the other with his sword whirling around his head. "Quarter, monsieur!" cried the trooper. "Here comes one of my betters for you." In effect, a knight on a chestnut horse was coming from Goitre, a most resplendent knight in golden armor with yellow trappings slashed and fluttering about him. "The Golden Knight," said Prosper, drawing a sharpish breath. "This is better than I looked for. My man," he went on, turning, "I have measured you with my eye. I think the signpost will bear you." "I have no doubt of it, messire," said the man ruefully. "You shall put it to the proof so sure as I live," continued Prosper. "If you stir from where you stand, I have to speak with your master." "Oh, make yourself quite easy, messire, and trust me," said the man. "I see with whom I have to deal." "Then deal not with him, my friend," said Prosper, and went to meet the Golden Knight. The Golden Knight set spear in rest, and came cantering down the track. Prosper let him come. When he was within hail, "Put up your spear, dame," said he, "and listen." The Golden Knight pulled up short, but held his spear couched against the worst. Prosper spoke again, quite cheerfully. "You and I have met, Dame Malfrey." "You're speaking foolishness and wasting my time, messire. I neither know you nor your dame." "You may have known my shield and more gaudy trim. Did I not turn gravedigger for you some years ago?" "Ah, no, you are Prosper Legay." "That is my name, Madame Malfrey. You know me at last?" "Yes, I know you. Take care you are in no friendly country." "I am a very friendly soul, but I will take care. You, I think, have many friends in these parts. One in special, a holy person, a man of religion. Is it so?" "He is a man of many parts. Prosper, he hath an arm." "He hath a gullet, I know," said Prosper cheerfully. "It is of him I would speak, dame, at this moment. I shall meet him before long, I hope, and should like to be advised by an old acquaintance. Will you tell me why he chose out the arms of the man you and I put into the ground?" "Why would you know that, Prosper?" "It seems to me an odd choice. There is a story about them. I am curious." "What is your story, Prosper? I will tell you this, that I tried to dissuade him." "Ah! Well, sir, your story?" "You told me they were the arms of de Genlis. Surely you were mistaken in that." "I will be frank with you, Prosper. I was mistaken. They are the arms of Salomon de Montquichet." "Pardon me, dame," said Prosper. "They are the arms of Salomon de Beaume." He never dealt clean a blow with a spear. The Golden Knight stood up rocking in his stirrups. Then he dropped his weapon and began to wail like a woman. "Oh, no, 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 Prosper, be merciful. Oh, God, kill me, kill me, kill me. Tell me you have lied, Prosper, or I must die." "I have not lied, madam. You have lied," said Prosper, watching with a bleak smile. On a sudden the Golden Knight spurred his horse violently. The beast lunged forward and shot off at a mad gallop, with his flanks streaming blood. Prosper watched him go. "Follow! Follow!" cried the Golden Knight to the man by the signpost. "I cannot, my lord," the man shouted as his master flew. "I am a man of my word." "Be off with you, you rascal!" jeered Prosper. "I have said my say." The man did not hesitate. Prosper watched the flying pair, a quiet smile hovering about his mouth. "My shot told, it seems," he said to himself. "If Salomon de Beaume were not what I believe him to have been, what is the grief of Madame Malfrey? Well, we will see next what Galore de Beaume has to say about it." And he turned his face toward the north and rode on. If he had followed the two, out of sight by now, he would have got nearer his heart's desire. But he could not do that. He had formed a judgment calmly. If he wanted Iswelt, he must find Galore. Galore had HAUTERIVE, but not Goitre. Therefore Galore was at Goitre. Prosper always accredited his enemies with his own quality. So he rode away from Iswelt, as proud as a pope. We will follow the Golden Knight while our breath endures. We can track him to HAUTERIVE. He never stopped rain till he reached it, and there at the gates dropped his chestnut dead of a broken heart. In the hall of the citadel it was no golden knight, but a grey-faced old woman who knelt before Galore in his chair. Her voice was dry as bare bones. If ever you owe me thanks for what I have done, and will yet do for you, Galore, my lover, you shall pay them now. Prosper is at Guat. He and Spiridion will be there alone. I give you back Spiridion. Give me the life of Prosper. Give me his head and his tongue. Give me his heart, and I will be your slave, who was once your world. Will you do it, Galore? Will you do it this night? By God, I will, said Galore. There is one other thing. The woman was gasping for breath. One little thing. Give me back the arms you bear. You must never wear them again. I always hated them. No good can ensue them. Give them to me, Galore, and wear them no more. By God, again, said Galore. That is impossible. I will never do it. What, when the whole forest rings with ENTRA per me, and wicket gates dazzle every eye on this side, one? My friend, where are your wits? That droll of a Montguichet did me a turn there before you had him, mistress. Ah, Galore, was all she could say. He has found me again. I am sick of the work, Galore. Let me go home. Speed me first, my delight, cried Galore, jumping up. He shouted through the door. Ho there! My horse and arms! Turn the guard out! In 3 minutes we are off! The woman crept away. She had worked her hardest for him, but he wanted nothing of her. Dirty weather by the rood, said Galore, looking out at the rain. Dirty weather and a smell of worse. Hearken to the wind in the turrets, gentlemen. We are for Guat. Spare no horseflesh. Forward! And he was gone through the dripping streets at the falling in of a wild day. It was the day FALVE had brought in his bride expectant to Litany Row. Half an hour later, Malfrey rode out of the east gate alone, and never held or looked back till she was safe in Tortensier. End of chapter 25. Recording by Scott McKinley. Chapter 26 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain, and for more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott McKinley. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 26. Guesswork at GOLTRES. A scud of wind and rain hampered Prosper on his ride over Quatre Heath. The steady increase of both in volume and force kept him at work all day, but towards dusk the wind dropped a little. The clouds split and drifted in black shreds over a clear sky full of the yellow evening light. Just at the twilight he came to a shallow mere, edged with reeds, with wildfowl swimming upon it, and others flying swiftly over on their way to the nest. At the far end of the lake, but yet in the water, was a dim castle settling down into the murk. A gaunt shell it was, rather than a habitable place. Its windows were sightless black. Only in the towers you could see through them the pale sky behind. The wind ruffled the mere little cold waves, lapped in the reeds. There was no other house in sight, whichever way you turned. In all the dun waste of raw and cold, it was Guat, or nothing for a night's lodging. Galore has been before me again, thought Prosper. The place is a skeleton, the husk of a house. Well, there must be a corner left which will keep the rain out. We shall have more before day if I am anything of a prophet. There was a huge bank of cloud to windward. The wind came uneasily in puffs, with a smell of rain. Prosper's horse shivered and shook himself from head to heels. "As I live," cried Prosper suddenly, "there's a light in the house." In a high window there was certainly a flickering light. Where there's a light, there's a man or a woman. Where there's one, there is room for two. I am from Goat, if I can win a passage. Riding up the shore of the lake, he found an old punt. Saracen, said he to his horse, I shall take to the water. Thou shalt go thy will this night, and may heaven send thee the luck of thy master. So saying, he unbridled him, took off his saddle, and let him go. Himself got into the punt, and pushed out over the mere. The great hulk of Goat rose threatening above him, fretted by little waves, staring down from 100 empty eyes. He made out a water gate, and drove his punt towards it. It was open. He pushed in, found a rotting stair, above it a door which was broken away and hanging by one hinge. The welcome with all three is cold, quoth Prosper, but we cannot stand on ceremony. It might be well to make sure of my punt. He maneuvered it under the stair with some trouble, lashed it fore and aft, and entered Goat by the slippery ascent, addressing himself as he went to God and Saint Mary the Virgin. The wooden stair led him into a flagged passage, which smelt strongly of fungus. He went down this as far as it would go, found a flight of stone steps with a swing door atop, pushed up here, and burst into a vast hall. It was waste and empty, echoing like a vault, crying desolation with all its tongues. This seemed to have been wild work. Benches, tables, trestles, chairs, torn up, dismembered, and scattered abroad. There were the ashes of a fire in the midst, some broken weapons, and the headpieces, and many dark patches which looked uncommonly like blood. Prosper made what haste he could out of this haunted place. The rats scuttled and squeaked as he traversed it from end to end. Beyond its great folding doors, he found another corridor hung with the ribbons of Arras, in the midst of a broad stone staircase. Up he went, 3 steps at a time, and stood in the counterpart of the lower passage, a corridor equally flagged, equally gloomy, and smelling equally of damp and death. There were, so far as he could see, open doors on either side which stretched for what seemed an indeterminable distance. But at the far end was the light he was after. He cared little how many empty chambers there might be, so that there was one tenanted. He started off accordingly in pursuit of the light. The passage ran the whole length of the house. The empty doors, as he passed them, gave on to bare walls and broken windows. Over many of them hung thick curtains of cobwebs and dust. White fungus cropped in the cracks. The rats seemed everywhere. Now and then he caught sight of a shredded arras on the walls. In one room a disordered bed, on the floor of another a woman's glove. Never a sight of life but rats, and never a sound but his own steps, the shrieking of the wind, the rattle of crazy windows. The door of the lighted chamber was set open. Prosper stood on the threshold and looked in. It was a narrow, dusty place, heaped with books on tables, chairs, and floor. The lamp which had beaconed him from over the water was of brass, and hung from the ceiling by a chain. At the window end sat a young man with long yellow hair, which was streaked over his bowed back. He was reading in a Hebrew book. The book was on a reading stand, and the young man kept his place in it with his thin finger. He seemed short-sighted to judge by the space betwixt his nose and his book. By his side, on a little lacquered table, was a deepish bowl of dull red porphyry, filled with water. Every now and again the young man, having secured his place firmly with his finger, would gaze into the bowl through a little crystal mace which he kept in his other hand. Then he would fetch a deep sigh and return to his book. Beyond the man, his bowl, and his books, Prosper could see little else in the room. There was, it is true, a shelf full of bottles, and another full of images, but that was all. Prosper stepped lightly into the room and laid a hand upon the reader's shoulder. The young man did not start. He carefully recorded his place before he lifted a thin face from his work to his visitor. You were conscious of an extravagantly peaked nose, like the beak of some waterfowl, of the wandering glance of 2 pale eyes, and of little else except a mild annoyance. "What is your pleasure, fair sir?" asked the young man. "Sir," began Prosper, "I fear I have intruded upon your labors." "You have," said the young man. It was an uncompromising beginning. The young man beamed upon him, waiting. "Nevertheless, sir," Prosper went on, "I am driven to force myself upon your hospitality for the night. Your house is large and apparently roomy. It is dark and wild weather, with a prospect of tempest. I must sleep here or on the moors." "Sir," said the other, "you shall be welcome to my poor house, and that notwithstanding the last guest I harbored murdered everybody in it but myself. If it had not been for the intercession of a very charming lady, who has but now left me, I had been dead ere this, and unable to play the host, either to her or you. This I say not as casting any imputation upon you, of whom I am willing to believe as much as, nay, more than, our limited acquaintance may warrant. Regard it rather as my excuse for affording you little more than a roof." "By my faith," said Prosper, "I had believed the castle to be deserted or sacked, but I am sorry enough to hear that my foreboding was so near the truth." "It was a certain lord calling himself Galore de Beaune, he and his company, who did these harms upon my house," the young man explained. "Me too he will assuredly murder before many days, unless indeed the lady of whom I spoke just now should return." "I think I may say that she will not return, and that it will be better for you if she do not. Galore, too, has other fish to fry. But if he should happen to come, I pray God that I may be with the company to fight at your back. So Prosper." "If God hear your prayer, which I should have thought more than dubious," returned his host, "I only hope he may see fit to help you to a company as well, for I have none. And as to fighting at my back, I promise you I am a most indifferent leader, being, as you see, somewhat immersed in other affairs." Prosper had really very little to say in answer to this. By way of changing the talk, he asked if the castle were not Goat. "You are quite right, sir," replied the other. "It is Goat, and I am Spiridion, the lord of Goat, of a most ancient stock, yet much at your service." Prosper bowed to his host, who at once resumed his prying and gazing. This did not suit the other's temper at all, for he was above all things a sociable soul. So after a minute he cut in again on another track. "You are a great student, fair sir?" said he. "Yes, I am," said the young man. "Then may I know what it is you search out so diligently, first in the book, and then in your bowl of water?" "Most certainly you may," replied his host. "I seek to find out what God may be." Prosper grew grave. "I had thought you a student of fishes," said he, "but I find you dive deeper. Yet indeed, sir, for my part, I think we had best be content to love and serve God as best we may, discerning him chiefly in the voice of honor and in his fair works. Moreover, Holy Church biddeth us nourish a lively faith. Therefore, as I think, the harder our understanding of God is to come at, the more abundant our merit who nevertheless believe." "That may be so," said the other, "but I can hardly be expected to love that which I know not, or to believe that which I cannot express. And as for Holy Church, what Holy Church may consider I know not, but when you speak of discerning God in honor and fair works, I understand you, and take up your argument in this manner, for what you think most eloquent of God may be a beautiful lady." "God is truly there for me," said Prosper, and thought of Iswelt's good eyes. "And for me, fair sir," cried his host, kindling. If all women were as lovely and wise as my friend of late, there indeed was a woman redolent of God." "Ah, you were out there, sir," said Prosper. "You were terribly out." The young man smiled. "Look now, my friend, where we are with our definitions," said he. "We divide at the onset. Now, say that instead of a woman, I found a turnip field the most adorable thing in the world. Can we both be right? No, indeed. Now my reading tells me of all the gods whom men have worshipped, a cleft and Put and Ra, of Melkoth also, and Bel, of Moloch, Thamos, and Astarte, a Phoenician deity. I learn next of the gods of Olympus, of those of Rome and Etruria, of the Scandinavians, and of many gods. Now either these people have made their own gods, in which case I too can make one, or God hath revealed himself to some one alone, and then he would seem to have dealt ungenerously with the others, equally his creatures, and left blind. Or he hath never revealed himself, which is against nature, or he is not. These are the questions I would solve, if Galore give me time." "Sir, sir," cried Prosper, "you do not but fog yourself to little purpose, but you should live honestly and sanely, going much abroad, and you would have no doubts." "My author," said Spiridion calmly, indicating his Hebrew text, "tells me that there are 31 different ways of finding God out, of which crystal gazing, says he, in a famous passage, is the readiest. But as yet I have not found it so. Maybe I shall try yours another day, if I have another day." Whereupon, as if reminded of his delaying, he would have turned again to his work, but Prosper clapped a hand to his shoulder. "Have done with groping in books, Spiridion," cried he. "Tell me what you think this is a time for such folly, when your life is threatened by Galore and his riders." "It is the time of all times," returned Spiridion. "For if I know not who is really God of all the host, with claims to his rank, how shall I pray when my visitation comes? Or how pray that it come not? It was for lack of this knowledge that my people were murdered the other day. So you see that the affair is urgent." "I think the defense of the house and a long sword would fit your case better," said Prosper dryly. "Meanwhile, you must forgive me if I remind you that I have ridden all day without food or rest, and beg of you to afford me one or the other." 10,000 pardons," said Spiridion, getting up at once, "that my little grief should make me forget your serious claims upon my hospitality. Come, sir, here are bread and olives. Here is a flask of a very passable wine. All at your service. Afterwards we will share a bed." They sat on books, and ate what there was. Outside the wind had freshened. It buffeted fitfully but fiercely at the window, and came with dashes of rain. Down the corridor they could hear the casements swinging and banging, and over all the wind itself roaring through the great bare passages as if they had been tunnels. "A wild night, Spiridion," said Prosper, and what a night, thought he, for a surprise. "Wild enough," replied Spiridion, "but I am indifferent to weather, being seldom abroad. How do you find this wine?" "Excellent," said Prosper, and drained his glass. "Of this Galore, whom I think you know," Spiridion continued, "I hear bad reports. Not only has he cut the throats of my household, but from the accounts given me by my fair friend, concerning whom," he said with a bow, "we are agreed to differ, I fear he is otherwise of a wild and irregular conversation." "You are right there, my friend," laughed Prosper. "If he murders me," the other went on, sipping his wine, "it will be on some such night as this." "I have just said as much to myself," Prosper replied, "but I will do my best to prevent him, I assure you." "You are so courteous a defender, fair sir," said Spiridion, "I could wish you a more worthy client." Prosper inwardly agreed with him. Shortly afterwards Spiridion bowed him to bed. For himself he carefully undressed and put on his nightshirt. Then, lying down, he was asleep in a moment. The storm was by this time a gale, the noise of it continuous outdoors and in. Prosper judged it expedient to have his arms within reach, the more so as he could not help fancying he had heard the sound of rowlocks on the mere. He stripped himself therefore to his doublet and breeches, heaped his armour by the bedside, slung his shield and sword over the foot, and then lay down by his peaceful companion. He had not forgotten either to look to the trimming and feeding of the lamp. Sleep, however, was miles from him in such a pandemonium of noise. The wind wailed and screamed, the windows volleyed, wainscots creaked, doors rattled on all their locks. Sometimes with a shock like a thunderclap, the body of the storm hurled against the walls. The great house seemed to shudder and groan. Then there would be a lull as if the spirits of riot had spent themselves. In one of these pauses, Prosper was pretty sure he heard a step on the stairs. Not at all surprised, for it was just such a night as he would have chosen, he listened painfully, but the noise drowned all. Came another moment of recoil. He heard it again, nearer. He got out of bed, went to the door, opened it silently, and listened. There were certainly movements in the house, feet coming up the stairs. He thought to catch hoarse whisperings and once the clang of metal. There was no time to lose. He shut, bolted, and locked the door, then turned to his armor. A swift step undisguised in the corridor put all beyond question there was an attack preparing. He had no time to do any more than snatch up shield and sword before he saw the flame of a torch under the door and heard the voices of men. Prosper stood, sword in hand, waiting. "Spiridion," he said, "wake up." Spiridion moaned, stirred a little, and sank again. A high voice called out, "Spiridion, thou thin traitor, open the door and deliver up him thou harbourest." The wind shrieked and mocked. Then Spiridion woke up with a shiver. "The hour has come before my God is ready. Now I must die unknowing," said he, and sat up in bed with his yellow hair all about his face. "It is I they seek," said Prosper. "Now, then, if it will save thee, I will open and go out to them." And he went straight to the door, put his face against the keyhole, and cried out, "If I come out, will ye save Spiridion alive?" There followed a babel of voices, speaking all at once. Afterwards the same shrill voice took up his challenge, wailing like the wind, "Spiridion, open the door before we break it in." Prosper said again, "Will you have me for Spiridion?" "We will have both, by God," rang a deep note, the voice of Galore. As if at a signal, swords began to batter at the door, pommels and blades. One pierced the panel and struck through on the inside. Prosper snapped it off short. "One less," he said, "but they will soon be done with it." "My friend," said Spiridion, who was shivering with cold, his nightshirt being over short for the season. "My friend, I must die. What can I do for thee? The time is short." "Brother," answered Prosper, "get a sword and harness, and I will keep the door till thou art ready. Then we will open it suddenly and do what becomes us." "Dear friend," Spiridion said mildly, "I have no sword, and since I am to die, I will die as well in my shirt as in a suit of mail." "Certainly you are a great fool," said Prosper. "Yet I will defend you as well as I can. Get behind me now, for the door is shaking and cannot hold out much longer." Their assailants, without any further speech among themselves, beat at the door furiously, or with short runs hurtled against it with their shoulders. It seemed impossible it should stand, yet stand it did. Then one, GALORS, cried suddenly out, "Fetch a hatchet!" and another ran helter-skelter down the corridor. The rest seemed to be waiting for him. The battering ceased. "Here," said Spiridion, standing in his nightshirt before the shelf of images. "Here are images of Christ on the cross, of Mahound, made by a Maltese Jew, of Diana of the Ephesians, and Jupiter Ammon. Here, too, are a Thammuz rotten jade and a cat-faced woman sitting naked in a chair. All are gods, and any one of them may be very god. Before which should I kneel? For to one I will as surely kneel as I shall surely die. Prosper flushed red with annoyance. Brother, said he, thou art a greater fool than I thought possible. Die how you will. God knows how little of a god am I, but I will do what I can. Hey, now I look about, he called out the next minute and leapt back into the room. The door split in the midst and fell apart. 2 men, fully armed with their visors down, burst into the light. They were upon him in a flash. Prosper up with his shield and drove at them. They were no match for him with swords, as they very soon found when he penned them back in the entry. One of the pair, indeed, lost his arm in the first passes of the game, but the press of men behind forced them suddenly and violently forward, whether they would or no. Prosper skewered one of them like a capon, against his own will, for he knew what must happen of that. Precisely, before he could disengage his weapon, 2 more were at him in front, and one dodging round behind him with a hatchet, slogged at his head with the back of it. Prosper tottered. It was all up with him. Another assailant slipped in under his guard with a pike, which he drove into his ribs. A second stinging blow from the hatchet dropped him. Prone on his face he fell, and never knew of the trampling he had from the freed pass. They cut down and slew Spiridion as he was kneeling in his shirt before the crucifix, and then GALORS came into the room to see that the work was done. Prosper was lying on his face as he had fallen, with a great hole in his head. GALORS suffered a contempt which he could not afford to such an enemy. He kicked the body. "Rot there, carrion," he said. Then, with an afterthought, "No, rot in the water. Throw the pair of them by the window," he ordered his men. "Wait outside the gates for me. I have things to do here." This was done. When he was alone, he stripped off all his armor and put on instead Prosper's equipment. The defaced shield vexed him. Nothing was left of the blazon, nothing was left at all but the legend. "Bide my timer." "That is what I will do no longer," said GALORS with a heavy oath. "I have bided long enough. Now, friend Prosper, do you bide yours. As for the cognizance, I know it very well by this. It shall be on again by the morning. Then we will see if I can do as Prosper what I have failed to do as GALORS." He headed his troop for HAUTERIVE, reached it before daylight, and ended, as he thought, a signal chapter in his progress. As for Prosper, he bided his time with a broken head in Peering Pool. End of chapter 26. Recording by Scott McKinley.
Chapter 27 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Moon Lilith. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 27. GALORS rides hunting. On the morning after the storm at GOLTRES, July 18th, GALORS sat in the hall of his stronghold habited as he had ridden in but a few hours before. In came a red-haired peasant, asking to be made his man. "Why so, fellow?" asked GALORS. "Lording," said FALVE, "because my mother hath done me a wrong." "Why, thou dog," cried GALORS, "wouldst thou cut thy mother's throat under my flag?" "Lording," FALVE answered, "I would not cut my mother's throat under the Pope's flag, but I know thee to be a great lord, master of all these walks of Morgrant. If I were made free of thy company, I could ask thee a mercy, and if I asked thee a mercy, it would be that thou shouldest order my mother to give me back my wife." "How, thy wife, rogue?" said GALORS, who was wary of the man. "Lording, she was to have been my wife this day, but she lay last night with my mother, and by the show of a certain token, which unbeknown to me she wore about her, prevailed upon my mother to let her go. So now she has escaped into the forest, and I am beggared of her without thy help." By this GALORS was awake. He leaned forward in his chair, put chin to hand, and asked quietly, "How was she called, this wife of thine, my knave?" "Lording," replied the poor eager rogue. "She was a boy at first, called Roy. Then she revealed herself a maiden. I asked her maiden name, red fool." "Her name, my lording, was Iseult le Desirous." "Aha, at last." He got up from his chair, saying shortly, "Take me this instant to thy mother." "But lord—" "Silence, lout, or I swing you sky high to your mother without a word." Poor FALVE, in a cold sweat, obeyed. They found the old lady making breathless preparations for departure. "Mother," began FALVE, "my lord GALORS—" "Peace, fool!" broke in GALORS. "Dame," he said civilly, "I must thank you for the great charge you have been at with a certain lady much in both our hearts. No doubt she has spoken to you of Messer Prosper Legay. Madam, I am he." "As God is great!" FALVE cried. "I could have sworn the lord of this town was Messer GALORS de Born." "And so he was but yesterday," said GALORS. "But now I hold it for the Countess Isabel." The old woman was convinced at this name. She caught GALORS by the arm. "And will you take back the lamb to the dam?" she bleated. "That is all I ask," replied GALORS, speaking the truth. "You may catch her, Messer. You may catch her." "Ah, if I could only have known of you yestereen." "She had but 7 hours' start of you. Take the path for Thornyhold Brush, and you'll find her. Jesu Christ! When I saw the bleeding bird again, I could have died, had there not been better work before me." "The bleeding bird? Ah, the token, you would say." "Yes, Messer, yes. The pelican in piety, the torn breast, the I and F. Ah, blood enough shed, blood enough. Go quickly, Sir Prosper, and testify for your name. 'Tis of good omen and better report." "And have you killed that sick wolf GALORS, Messer?" There God will bless you for that, and prosper you as you have prospered us." GALORS swallowed the pill and went out with no more ceremony. FALVE ran after him. Ah, Messer," he sputtered. GALORS let him sputter till they were within the courtyard. Then he called to a trooper. "Take this man and flog him well," said he. FALVE was seized. "Ah, my lording," cried he, "what do you there? Must I be flogged because I have lost my wife?" "No, dog, because you have married mine." Nay, mercy, my lording, I have not yet married her." "Ha!" said GALORS, "then you shall be flogged for jilting her." And flogged he was, and the flogging cost GALORS his prize. GALORS now bestirred himself. First he sat down and wrote a letter to the Countess, thus conceived: "To the High Lady, the Lady Isabel de Force, Countess of HAUTERIVE, Countess Dowager of March and Belesme, Lady of Morgrant, GALORS de Born, Lord of HAUTERIVE, GOLTRES, and West Wan, sendeth greeting in the Lord everlasting. That which your serenity lost early is not too late found, and by us, the crystal locket, having the pelican in the crown of thorns, when we bring it upon the bosom where it hath ever slept, waiting for the day which shall reveal it to you, will testify whether we lie or lie not. Know, however, that she shall assuredly come, and not unattended, but, as befits her condition, under the hand of him who, having found her, will provide that she be not lost again. It is not unknown to you, high mightiness, how our power and estate have grown in these days to the threatening of your own. So it is indeed that now, in blood, in fees, in renown, in power of life and member, we are near enough to you to seek alliance still more close. And this is the last word of GALORS. Let the wearer of the crystal locket come home as the betrothed of the Lord GALORS day born, an heiress of High March and Morgaunt, Countess of HAUTERIVE in time to be, and she shall come indeed. Otherwise she comes not, but HAUTERIVE wears the crown, which High March looks to put on. Thus we commend you to the holy keeping of God. From our tower of HAUTERIVE, on the feast of Saint Arnulfus, Bishop and Martyr, the 15th calends of August, in the first year of our principality west of Wan. This letter, sealed with the 3 wicket gates and the circumscript ENTRA per me, he sent forward at once by a party of 6 riders, one of whom carried a flag of truce. Then, with but 3 to follow him, he rode out of the town, taking the path for Thornyhold Brush. End of chapter 27.
Chapter 28 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marie Christian. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 28. Mercy with the Beasts. Iseult, so soon as she had seen the last of old Ursula, turned her face to the south and the sun. She walked a mile through bush and bramble with picked-up skirts. Then she sat down and took off her scarlet shoes and stockings, threw them aside, and went on with a lighter tread. Not that she was above the glory of silk robes and red slippers, or unconscious that they heightened the charm of her person. The old woman's glass, the old woman's face had told her better than that. Indeed, if she could have believed she would meet with Prosper at the end of that day, she would have borne with them, hindrance or none. But this was not to be. Her hair was yet a good 6 inches from her knees. So now, bare-legged and barefooted, her skirts pulled back and pinned behind her, she felt the glad tune of the woods singing in her veins, and ran against the stream of cool air deeper into the fountain heart whence it flowed, the great silence and shade of the forest. The path showed barer, the stems more sparse, the roof above her denser. Soon there was no more grass, neither any moss, nothing but mast and the leaves of many autumns. Keeping always down the slope, and a little in advance of the sun, by midday she had run clear of the beech forest into places where there grew hornbeams, with 1 or 2 sapling oaks. There was tall bracken here, and dewy grass again for her feet. She rested herself, sat deep in shade listening to the murmur of bees in the sunlight, and the gentle complaining of wood pigeons in the treetops far toward the blue. She lay down luxuriously in the fern, pillowed her cheek on her folded hands, closed her eyes, and let all the forest peace fan her to happy dreaming. It was impossible to be ill at ease in such a harbor. The alien faces and brawl of the town, the grime, the sweat, the blows of the charcoal burners, her secret life there in the midst of them, the shame, the hooting and the stunning of her last day at distant High March, Malfrey, GALORS, leering FALVE, All these grim apparitions sank back into the green woodland vistas. All the shocks and alarums of her timid little soul were subdued by the rustling boughs and the crooning voices of the doves. She saw a bright country in her dreams. Prosper was abroad on a spurred horse. His helmet gleamed in the sun. His enemies fell at his onset. The deer browsed about her. From the branches a squirrel peeped down. The woodbirds with kindly peering eyes hopped within reach of her cradled arms. Soon, soon, soon she should see him. She would be sitting at his knees. Her cheek would be on his breast. His arm hold her close. His kind eyes read all her love story. What a reward for what a little aching. She fell asleep in the fern and smiled at her own dreams. When she awoke, 2 girls sat sentinel beside her. They were ruddy, handsome, cheerful girls, with scarcely a pin's point of difference between them. They had brown eyes, brown, loose hair, the bloom of healthy blood on their skin. One was more fully formed, more assured. Perhaps she laughed rather less than the other. It was not noticeable. Iseult, with sleepy eyes, regarded them languidly, half awake. They sat on either side of her. Each clasped a knee with her 2 hands. Both watched her. Then the elder, with a little laugh, shook her hair back from her shoulders, stooped quickly forward, and kissed her. Iseult sat up. "Oh, who are you?" she wondered. "I am Belvisé," said the kissing girl. "I am Mellifont," said the laugher. "Do you live here?" "Yes." "Is this Thornyhold?" "Thornyhold Brush is very near." "Will you take me? I am to wait there." "Come, sister." Belvisé helped her up by the hand. When she was afoot, Mellifont caught her other hand and kissed her in her turn, a glad and friendly little embrace. Friends indeed they looked as they stood hand-linked in the fern. All 3 were of a height, Iseult a shade shorter than the sisters. She contrasted her attire with theirs, her own so ceremonious, theirs, what there was of it, simple in the extreme. A smock of coarse green flax, cut at a slant, which left one shoulder and breast bare, was looped on to the other shoulder, and caught at the waist by a leather strap. It bagged over the belt, and below it fell to brush the knees. Arms, legs, and feet were bare and brown. Visibly, they wore nothing else. Mellifont laughed to see the scrutiny. "We must undress you," she said. "Why? You cannot run like that." "No, that is quite true, but—" "Oh," said Belvisé, "you are quite safe. No men come where the king is." "The king?" "King of the herd." "Ah, the deer are nearby." "All Thornhold is theirs. The great herd is here." "Do you live with them?" "Yes." "And they feed you?" "Yes." "Ah," said Iseult, "then I shall be at peace till my lord comes, if there are no men." "Have you a lord, a lover?" "Yes, he is my lord, and I love him dearly." "We have none. What is your name?" "I am called Iseult la Desirous." "Because you are a lover?" "Yes, I am a lover." "I will never love a man," said Belvisé rather gravely. "All men are cruel." "I will never have a lover, nor be a lover, until men know what love is," said Mellifont in her turn. "And what is love, do you think?" Iseult asked her, thrilling. "Love, love. It is service," said Belvisé. "Service and giving," said Mellifont. Iseult turned aside and kissed Mellifont's cheek. They had reached the low ground, for they had been walking during this colloquy. Oaks stood all about them, with bracken shoulder high. Into this 3 girls plunged, and held on till they were stopped by a shallow brook. The sisters waded in, so did Iseult when she had picked up her skirts and petticoats. After a little course upstream through water joyfully cool, They reached a place where the brook made a bend round the roots of an enormous oak. Turning this, they opened on a pool broad and deep. "We will robe you here," said Belvezet, meaning rather to unrobe her. The great gnarly roots of the oak were as pillars to a chamber which ran far into the bank. Here the two girls undressed Iseult, and here they folded and laid by her red silk gown. She became a pearly copy of themselves in all but her hair. Her hair! They had never seen such hair. Measuring it, they found it almost to her knees. "You cannot go with it loose," said they. "We must knot it up again, but we will go first to the herd." "Let us go now," added Mellifont on an impulse, and took Iseult by the hand. Crossing the brook below the pool, they climbed the bank and found themselves in a sunny, broad place. The light glanced in and out of the slim gray trees. The bracken was thinner, the grass rich and dewy. Here Iseult saw the great herd of red deer, hundreds of hundreds, hinds and calves with some brockets and hearts, busy feeding. Over all that spacious glade the herd was spread out till there seemed no end to it. A sentinel stag left feeding as they came on. He looked up for a moment, stamped his foot, and went back to grass. One or two others copied him, but mostly the three girls could go among them without notice. Imperceptibly, however, the herd followed them, feeding on their way to the king, so that by the time they reached him, there was a line of deer behind them, and deer at either flank. The great hart also stamped his foot and stood at gaze, with towering antlers and dewy nostrils very wide. Before him, Belvezet and Mellifont let go of Iseult's hand. She was to make her entry alone. She put them behind her back, hardly knowing what was expected of her, shrank a little into herself, and waited timidly. Slowly then the great hart advanced before his peering courtiers, pacing on with nodding head and horns. Exactly in front of Iseult he planted his forefeet. Thence he looked down from his height upon her. She had always loved the deer, and was now not afraid, but she covered herself with her hair. The king's stag smelt her over, beginning at her feet. He snuffed for a long time at the nape of her neck, blew in her hair so as to spray it out like a fountain scattered to the wind. Then he fell to licking her cheek. She, made bold, put a hand and laid it on his mane. Shyly she stood thus, waiting events. The great beast lifted his head high and gave a loud bellow. All the deer chorused him. The forest rang. So Iseult was made free of the herd. Belvezet and Mellifont lay beside her on the grass. Iseult lay on her face, while Mellifont coiled and knotted up her hair. "If love is giving, and you are a lover, Iseult," said she, "you would give your hair." "I have given it," said Iseult, and told them her story as they all lay there together. "And to think that you have endured all this from men, and yet love a man," cried flushed Mellifont when she had made an end. But Iseult smiled wisely at her. "Ah, Mellifont," she said, "the more you saw of men, the more you would find to love in him." "Indeed, I should do no such thing," said Mellifont, firing up again. "You could not help it. Everyone must love him." "That might not suit you, Iseult," said Belvezet. "Why should it not? Would it prevent my love to know him loved? I should love him all the more." "Hark!" cried Mellifont on a sudden. She laid her ear to the ground, then jumped to her feet. "Come to the herd, come to the herd," she whispered. Belvezet was on her feet also in a trice. Both girls were hot and bright. "What disturbs you?" asked Iseult, who had heard nothing. "Horsemen, quick, quick!" They all ran between the trees to regain the deer. Iseult could hear no horses, but the sisters had, and now she saw that the deer had. Every head was up, every ear still, every nostril on the stretch. Listening now intently, faint and far did she hear a muffled knocking. It was like a beating heart, she thought. Whatever it was, the deer guessed an enemy. Upon a sudden stamp, the whole herd was in motion. Led by the hart royal, they trotted noiselessly down the wood, till in the thick fern they lay still. The girls lay down with them. The sound gained rapidly upon them. Soon they heard the crackling of twigs, then the swish of swept brushwood, then the creaking of girths. Iseult hid her face, lying prone on her breast. GALORS and his men came thundering through the wood. Their horses were reeking, dripping from the flanks. The riders, 4 of them, looking neither right nor left, passed over the open ground, where a few minutes before she whom they desperately sought had been lying at their mercy. But GALORS, fled by all things living in Morgrant, scourged on like a destroying wind and was gone. Iseult little knew how near she had been to the unclean thing. If she had seen him, she would have run straight to him without a thought, for he bore the red feathers in his helmet, and behind him, on the shield, danced in the glory of the new gilt, the fesse dansette. It may be doubted if the instincts of the earthborn can ever pierce the trappings of a knight-at-arms. They trust in emotions which such gear is designed to hide or transfigure. Iseult, observe, had caught Prosper out of his harness, when before the face of the sky she had thrilled him to pity. But when once he had stooped to her, for the very fact, she made haste to set him up on high in her heart, and in more seemly guise. There and thenceforward he stood on his pedestal figured, not as a pitiful Savior, whom a girl must be taught to worship, but as an armed God who suffered her homage. She was no better, or no worse, if you will, than the rest of her sex in this, that she loved to love, and was bewildered to be loved. So she would never get him out of armor again. Her God might not stoop. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marie Christian. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 29. WANMEETING CRIES. Ha, St. James. The story returns to Prosper Legay and his broken head. The blow had been sharp, but Peering Pool was sharper. It brought him to consciousness, of a sort sufficient to give him a disrelish for drowning. Lucky for him he was unarmed. He found himself swimming, paddling, rolling at random. He swallowed quantities of water, and liked drowning none the better. By the little light there was, he could make out the line of the dark hull of GOLTRES. By the little wit he had remembered that the water gate was midway the building or thereabouts. He turned his face to the wall, and half clinging, half swimming, edged along it till he reached port. The last ebb of his strength sufficed to drag him up the stair. Then he floated off into blankness again. When he stirred, he was stiff and near blind with fever. A cold light silvered the pool. It was not yet dawn. His plight was pitiable. He ached and shivered and burned. He drowsed and muttered, dreamed horribly, sweated and was cold, shuddered and was hot. One of his arms he could not lift at all. At one of his sides there was a great stiff cake of cloth, and blood and water. He became lightheaded, sang, shouted, raved, swore, prayed. To me, Iseult. Ah, dogs of the devil, this to a young maid. Yes, madame, the Lady Iseult, and my wife. Love her. Oh God, I love her at last. Hounded out. Love of Christ, how I love her. Bailiff, GALORS will come, a white-faced sullen dog. Cut him down, bailiff, without mercy, for he hath shown no mercy. The man in the wood, ha, dead. Salomon de Born, green froth on his lips, fie, poison. She has killed GALORS' only son. GALORS, she has poisoned him. Oh, mercy, mercy, Lord, must I die? And then with tears and the whining of a child, Iseult, Iseult, Iseult. In tears his delirium spent itself, and again he was still in a broken sleep. The sun rose, the sky warmed itself and glowed, the crispy waves of peering pool glittered, the white burden it bore floated face upwards, an object of interest and suspicion for the coots. Soon a ray of generous heat shot obliquely down upon the sleeper on the stairs. Prosper woke again, stretched and yawned. Most of his pain seemed now to center in the pit of his stomach, a familiar grief. Prosper was hungry. "Pest," said the youth, "how hungry I am! I can do nothing till I have eaten." He tried to get up, and did succeed in raising himself on all fours, but for the life of him he could do no more. He sat down again and thought about eating. He remembered the bread and olives, the not unkindly red wine of the night before. Then he remembered Spiridion, dispenser of meat and many questions. "That poor doubting rogue!" he laughed, but he sobered himself. "I do ill to laugh, God knows. The man must be dead by now, and all his doubts with him. I must go find him, but I must eat some of his bread and olives first." Once more he got on all fours, and this time he crawled to the stop of the stairway. Clinging to the lintel and hoisting himself by degrees, he at last stood fairly on his feet, but with a spinning head, and a sickness as unto death. He tottered and flickered, but he stuck to his doorpost. "Bread and olives," he cried. "I am to die, it seems, but by the Lord I will eat first." He made a rush for it, gained so the great hall, dizzied through it somehow, and out into the corridor. He flung himself at the stone stairs with the desperation of his last agony, half crawled, half swarmed up to the top, dragging his legs after him at the end, like a hare shot in the back, and finished his course to Spiridion's chamber on hands and knees. He had probably never in his life before worked so hard for a breakfast. He was dripping with sweat, shaking like gossamer, but his fever had left him. Bread and a bottle of wine did wonders for him. He felt very drunk when he had done, and was conscious that pot valiancy only gave him the heart to tear off his clothes. A flask of sweet oil from Spiridion's shelf helped him here. Next he probed the rents. He found a deepish wound in the groin, a sword cut in the fleshy part of his left arm. Then there was his head. He assured himself that the skull was whole. "I never respected my ancestors before," he cried. "Such a headpiece is worthy of a crusader." He kindled a fire, heated water, washed out his hurts, oiled them, and bound them up with one of Spiridion's bed sheets. "Now," he reflected, "by rights I should go and hunt for my poor host, but I am still drunk, unfortunately. Let me consider. Spiridion must pass for a man. If he is dead, he will wait for me. If he is not dead, he is no worse off than I am. Good. I will sleep." And he slept around the clock. Next morning when he awoke, he was stiff and sore, but himself. He finished the bread, drank another bottle of wine, and looked about for his armor. It was not there. Instead, the white wicket gates gleamed at him from a black shield, white plumes from a black headpiece, and the rest of a concatenation. "Entre permis," he read. "Enter I will," said Prosper, "and by you. This device," he went on as he fitted the cuisses, "this device is not very worthy of Dame GALORS. It speaks of hurry. It speaks even of precipitation. For if he must needs wear my harness, at least he might have carried his own. GALORS was flurried. If he was flurried, he must have had news. If, having news, he took my arms, it must have been news of Iseult. He intended to deceive her by passing for me. Good. I will deceive his allies by passing for himself. But first I must find Spiridion." He had too much respect for his enemy, as you will observe if I have made anything of GALORS. GALORS was no refiner, not subtle. He was direct. When he had to think, he held his tongue, so that you should believe him profound. When he got a thought, he made haste to act upon it, because it really embarrassed him. None of Prosper's imaginings were correct. If the monk had been capable of harboring 2 thoughts at a time, there would not have been a shred of mail in the room. That sodden thing lipped by the restless water was Spiridion. He lay on his back, thinner and more peaked than ever in life. His yellow hair made him an aureole. He looked like some martyred ascetic, with his tightened smile and the gash halfway through his neck. Prosper leaned upon his punt pole, looking sorrowfully at him. "Alas, my brother," he said half whimsically, "do you smile? Even so, I think God should smile that he had let such a thing be made. And if, as I believe, you know the truth at last, that is why you also smile. But shut your eyes, my brother," he added, stooping to do the office. "Shut your eyes, for you wore them thin with searching, and now can see without them. Let them rest." Very tenderly he pulled him out of the water, very reverently took him to land. He buried him before his own gates, and over him set the crucifix, which in the end he had found grace to see. He was too good a Christian not to pray over the grave, and not sufficient of a hero to be frank about his tears. At the end of all this business he found his horse. Then he rode off at a canter for HAUTERIVE. It is one thing to kindle military fires in the breast of a high bailiff, quite another to bid them out. Prosper had overstepped his authority. The high bailiff of WANMEETING held himself in check for the better part of a week, after his generalissimo's departure. At the end of 5 days he could endure it no more. His harness clamored, his sword tarnished for blood. He had 1,500 men in steel. That would mean 1,501 tarnishing blades, and the unvoiced reproaches of 1,501 suits of mail. In a word, the high bailiff itched to try a fall with the redoubtable GALORS de Born. He sent therefore a man to ring the great bell of the parish church. This assembled the citizens pell-mell, for the times were stirring. The high bailiff, being assured of his auditory, summoned the garrison, put himself at the head of them on a black stallion, sounded trumpets, and marched into the marketplace. The cheers clipped him like heady wine, but it was the eloquence of the women's handkerchiefs that really gave him heart. Standing in his stirrups, hat in hand, he made a short speech. "Men of WANMEETING and brothers," he said, "today you shall prove yourselves worthy of your lady paramount, of your late master, and of me. GALORS de Born, the arch-enemy, is skulking in his strong tower, not daring to attack us. Men of WANMEETING, we will go and bait him. HAUTERIVE is ours. Follow me, crying, 'Ha, St. James!' 'Ha, St. James!' shouted the men, with their caps pike high. The bailiff glowed in his skin. He drew his sword. 'Forward!' he gave the word. The entire ardent garrison marched out of the town, and WANMEETING was left with its women and elders, anybody's capture. The consequence of these heroical attitudes was that Prosper, riding hard to HAUTERIVE, came in sight of a besieging army round about it. A tented field, a pavilion, wherefrom drooped the saltire of de Force, a long line of attack, in fine, a notable scheme of offense. He saw a sortie from the gates driven back by as meddlesome a cavalry charge as he could have wished to lead. "The bailiff of WANMEETING, as I live by bread," he cried out. He stayed for some time watching the fray from a little rising ground. The cavalry, having beaten in the defenders, retired in good order. The archers advanced to cover a party of pikemen with scaling ladders. "Now is my time to board the bailiff," said Prosper, and rode coolly across the field. The high bailiff saw, as he thought, GALORS himself riding unattended towards him. "Ha, negotiations," said he, "and in person. I have hit a mark, it seems. I may take a high tone. Unconditional surrender and all arms, hey?" Prosper rode up saluting. "Messire de Bourne," said the bailiff. "Prosper Legay," said the other. "Madame Virgin, I thought you had perished, Messire." "Not at all, bailiff. Was that why you took over my command?" The bailiff bowed. "I gladly relinquish it, Messire." Prosper nodded pleasantly. "That last charge of yours could hardly have been bettered, though I think you might have got in. How many men did you drop?" 10, Messire. We brought off the wounded." 10 is enough. You shall lose no more. Call off that scaling party." The bailiff repeated the order. "Your men know their work," said Prosper. "But why do they cry for St. James?" The high bailiff colored. "Well, Messire," he said, "there is undoubtedly a St. James, an apostle and a great saint." "Of the greatest," said Prosper. "But pardon, I thought your burg was devoted to St. Crispin." "Messire, it is so, but there were reasons. First, your battle cry should be familiar." "As St. Crispin to WANMEETING?" "As the name of James, Messire, for it is my own poor name." "Ah," said Prosper, "I begin to see." "Then," said the bailiff, pursuing his reasons, "a battle cry should be short, of one syllable." "Like St. Denis?" Prosper asked. "Like St. George, Messire." "Or St. Andrew?" said Prosper sweetly. Or Montjoy, or Bide the Time, bailiff?" "Messire, you have me at a disadvantage for the moment. The name is, however, that of a saint." "Say no more, bailiff, but listen. There need be no more bloodshed over this place. Get your men together to advance at a signal from within. I will go alone into the town. Now do you notice that little square window in the citadel? When you see the saltire hang there, you will march in and meet me at the bishop's gate." "Oh, Messire, what will you do?" "Leave that to me," Prosper said as he rode off. He rode close to the moat and kept by it, making a half circuit of the walls. He had calculated on GALORS' armor, and calculated well, for nobody molested him from the defender's side. At the bishop's gate he reined up, and stood with his spear erect at the length of his arm. "Who comes?" cried the sentry. "Entre per me," growled Prosper, with a shot for GALORS' sulky note. The gate swung apart, the bridge fell, the portcullis was drawn up. Prosper rode through the streets of HAUTERIVE amid the silence of the inhabitants and the cheers of the garrison, two very different sets of persons. He went into the citadel, displayed the appointed signal, then returned on horseback to the bishop's gate. He had not a word to say, but this was quite in character. So he stood waiting. There was presently a fine commotion at the gate. A man came running up to him. "Messire, they are going to attack the gate." "Open it," said Prosper. "Messire!" Open it, hound!" The man reeled, but carried the order. Prosper rode stately out, and when he returned a second time, it was at the head of the Countess Isabel's troops. "Bailiff," said he, when they were in the citadel and all the news out, "I am no friend of your mistress, as you know, but I am not a thief. Hauterive is hers. Tomorrow morning I shall declare it so. Until then, GALORS, if you please, is lord. Let me now say this," he continued. "I admire you because you have a high heart, but you lack one requisite of generalship, as it appears to me. You have no head. Get back at once to WANMEETING with 1,000 of your men, and leave me 500 of them to work with. You may think yourself lucky if you find one stone on another, or one man's wife as she should be. By the time you are there, you will no doubt have orders from High March. You may send news thither that this place is quiet and restored, as from tomorrow morning, to its allegiance. Good morning, bailiff." The bailiff was very much struck with Prosper's sagacity, and went at once. Prosper and his 500 men held the citadel. He confided his secret to those whom he could trust. The remainder fraternized in the wine shops and dealt liberally in surmise. The general opinion seemed to be that GALORS had married the Countess Isabel. Having thus ridded him of all his charges, Prosper could steer the ship of his mind whither his soul had long looked, to Iseult and marriage. Marriage was become a holy thing, a holy sepulchre of peace to be won at all costs. No crusader was he, mind you, fighting for honor, but a pitiful beaten wayfarer longing for ease from his aching. He did not seek, he did not know, to account for the change in him. It had come slowly. Slowly the girl had transfigured before him, slowly risen from below him to the level of his eyes, and now she was above him. He shrined her high as she had shrined him, but for different reasons as became a man. What a woman loves in man is strength. What a man loves in women is also strength, the strength of weak things. The strength of the weak thing, Iseult had been that. She had known how to hold him off because of her love's sake. There is always pity, which should become reverence, in a man's love. He had never pitied her till she fought so hard for the holiness of her lover. Oddly enough, Iseult loved him the more for the very attack which she had foiled. Odd as it may be, that is where the truth lies. As for him, gratitude for what she had endured for his sake might go for nothing. Men do not feel gratitude, they accept tribute. But if they pity, and their pity is quickened by knowledge of the pitiful, then they love. Her pleading lips, her dear startled eyes stung him out of himself. And then he found out why her eyes were startled, and why her lips were mute. She was lovely. Yes, for she loved. This beseeching child, then, loved him. He knew himself homeless now until she took him in. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Marie Christian. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. The Chained Virgin of St. Thorn. The Abbot Richard of Malbank St. Thorn went hunting the deer in Morgrant with a good company of prickers and dogs. In Spinshaw he unharboured a stag, and he followed him hard. The hart made straight for Thornyhold Brush, where the great herd lay. There Mellifont, who was sentry for the time, heard him and gave the alarm. Fern brakes will hide man from man, but here were dogs. The hunted hart drove sheer into the thicket on his way to the water. A dog was at his heels. Half a dozen more were hard on him. The herd had scattered on all hands long before this. Mellifont saved herself with them, but Belvezet, tearing to help Iseult, was caught. A great hound snapped at her as he passed. She limped away with a wounded side. Iseult, too much of a woman and too little of a hind, stood still. She had closed with fate before. Up came the abbot's men with horns and shouting voices for the baying of the deer. He, brave beast, was knifed in the brook and broken up. The dogs called off and leashed. Then one of the huntsmen saw Iseult. She had let down her hair for a curtain and stood watching them intently, neither defiant nor fearful, but with a long, steady, unwinking gaze. Her bosom rose quick and short. There was no other stressful sign. She was flushed rather than white. One of the men thought she was a wood girl. They all knew of such beings. He crossed himself. Another knew better. Her mother Maud was a noted witch. He whistled. A third thought she was uncommonly handsome. He could only look. The dogs whimpered and tugged at the leash. They doubtless knew that there was blood in her, so all waited till the abbot came up, much out of breath. Iseult, cloaked in her panoply of silence, saw him first. In fact, the abbot had eyes only for the dead hart which had led him such a race. One of the prickers ran forward and caught at his stirrup leather. "Lord Abbot, here is the strangest thing my eyes have ever seen in Morgrant. As we followed the chase, we drove into a great herd which ran this way and that way, and in the thick of the deer were 3 young women scantily attired, as the one you see yonder, going with the beasts, of whom 2 have got clear, one bitten by the mouse-colored hound, and this one remains speechless. And who the others were, whether flesh and blood or wind and breath, I cannot tell you. But if this laggard is not Iseult, whom we call La Desirous, Mata the Moor's daughter, I am no fit servant for your holiness's diversions." The abbot had pricked up his ears. Now he looked sharply at Iseult. "You are right, Swain," he said. "Leave her to me. Girl," he turned to her, "this time it shall likely go hard with thee. Trees are plenty and ropes easy to come by. I warned thee before. I shall not warn thee now." Iseult bowed her head. "What dost thou do here, herding in the wood with wild beasts?" he went on. "Lord, none but the beasts will give me food or rest or any kindness at all. There is no pity in man nor woman that I have seen, save in 2, and one is dead. Prosper Legay, my lord and husband, hath pity, and will come to me at last. And whether he shall come to my body alone, or my spirit alone, he will come. And now, Lord, hang me to a tree." "Dost thou want to be hanged?" he asked. "Nay, Lord, I am too young to be hanged," she said. "Moreover, though I am wedded to my lord, I am not a wife. For only lately he hath loved me, and that since we were put apart." "Wed and a virgin, girl? Where is thy husband?" "Lord, he is searching for me." "Where hath he been? What hath he done? Or thou, what hast thou done for such a droll fate as this?" Iseult very simply told him everything. Of GALORS he already had some news, enough to dread more. But when he heard that the girl had actually been in High March Castle, had been expelled from it, he crossed himself and thanked God for all his mercies. He became a devout Christian at this critical point in Iseult's career, whereby her neck was saved a second time from the rope. He felt a certain pity. She a handsome girl, too, though his type for choice was blonde. For her simplicity, and, as he certainly wished to obtain mercy, reflected upon the possible blessings of the merciful. Besides, GALORS was at large, GALORS who knew the story, to say nothing of Prosper, also at large, who did not know the story, but did know, on the other hand, the Countess Isabel. Difficult treading, but so the habits of a lifetime for once chimed in with its professions. Even as he stood pitying, he roughed out another set of shifts. Prosper and his unconsummated marriage might be set aside. The fool, he thought with a chuckle, deserved it. There remained GALORS. He would get the girl married to a mean of the Abbey or stay. He would marry her elsewhere and get a dowry. She had filled out astonishingly. Every line of her spoke of blood. There would be no trouble about a dowry. Then he might supplant GALORS by being beforehand with him, at the Countess's ear. Gratitude of the mother, gratitude of the daughter, gratitude of the son-in-law. Thus charity walked hand in hand with policy. The girl was a beauty. What a picture she made there, short-frocked, flushed and loose-haired, like an Amazon. But, by Mars, not maimed like an Amazon. The abbot was a connoisseur of women, as became a confessor and a man of the world. "If I do not hang thee, Iseult, wilt thou come with me to St. Thorn?" "Yes, Lord, I will come." "Up with you then before me," said the abbot, and stooped to lift her. Her hair fell back as she was swung into the saddle. "My lady," thought the abbot, "it is clear you are no Amazon, but I should like to know what you wear round that fine little neck of yours." He bided his time and sent the men and dogs on ahead. Then at starting, he spurred his horse so that the beast plunged both his riders forward. The burden of the chain split its harborage, and the next minute the abbot had ring and locket in the palm of his hand. "What is this ring, my girl?" he asked. "My lord, it is my wedding ring, wherewith I was wed in the cottage." "Ah, is that it? Well, I will keep it until there is need." Iseult began to cry at this, which cut her deeper than all the severances she had known. She could confess to the ring. "Don't cry, child," said the abbot, whom women's tears troubled. "Believe me when I say that you shall have it for your next wedding." "Oh, my ring, my ring! What shall I do? It is all I have. Oh, my lord, my lord!" This pained the abbot extremely. He got what satisfaction there was from the thought that, having dropped it behind him, he could not give it back for all the tears in the world. He was busy now examining the other token, a crystal locket whereon were a pelican and piety circled with a crown of thorns, and on the other side the letters I and F interlaced. He knew it better than most people. "Iseult, stop crying," he said. "Take off this chain and locket and give them to me." So she did. "Ah, my lord," she pleaded as she tendered, "I ask only for the ring." "Plague take the ring," cried the abbot, very much annoyed. "I will throw it away if you say another word about it." The threat chilled her. She dried her eyes, hoping against hope, for even hope needs a sign. When he had his prize safe in holy Thorn, the abbot Richard, who had a fantastic twist in him, and loved to do his very rogueries in the mode, set himself to embroider his projects, when he should have been executing them. His lure was a good lure, but she would be none the worse for a little gilding. There must be a pretty cage, with a spice of malice in its devising, to excite the tenderer feelings. It should be polite malice, however, a mere hint at a possible tragedy, behind a smirk. He dressed her in green silk because she was fresh-colored and had black hair. If she had been pale, as when he first knew her, and as she was to be again before he knew her no more, the dress would have been red, depend upon it. He put a gold ring on her finger, a jewel on her forehead, a silver mirror, and a book of hours bound in silver leaves to swing at her girdle. Her chamber was hung with silk arras, the loving history of Aristotle and a princess of Cyprus. She had 2 women to wait upon her, to tire her hair in new ways and set new crowns upon it. She had a close garden of her own, with roses and a fountain, grass lawns, peacocks. She had pages to serve her kneeling, musical instruments, singing boys and girls. He gave her a lapdog. Finally, he kissed her and said, "You are to be queen of this place, Iseult, the much desired." All this the abbot did. This also he did, his crowning piece. He caused her to wear round her waist a girdle made of bright steel, in which was a staple. To the staple he fixed a fine steel chain, a toy, a mimicry of prisons, but in fact a chain, and the other end of a chain was fixed to a monk's wrist. The chain was fine and flexible. It was long, it could go through the keyhole, and did, but it was a chain. Wherever the girl went, to the garden, to table, to music, to bed, abroad, or to mass, she was chained to a monk, and a monk to her. The abbot Richard rested on the 7th day, contemplating his labors with infinite relish. It seemed to him that this was to be politic with an air. So far as he might, he did everything in that manner. Iseult bore the burden much as she had borne the thwackings of the charcoal burners, with ingrained patience. Seriously, one only cross fretted her, the loss of her ring. This indeed cried desertion upon her. Prosper had never seemed so far, nor his love so faint and ill-assured. It would seem that kindness really killed her by drugging her spirit as with anodyne. As she had fallen at Gracedieu, so she fell now into a languid habit where tears swam in flood about the lids of her eyes, where the eyes were too heavy for clear sight, and the very blood sluggish with sorrow. She grew pale again, hollow-eyed, diaphanous, a prism for an unearthly ray. Her beauty took on its elfin guise. She walked as a ghost. Night and day she felt for the ring, though she knew it was not there. Her hand was always in her vest, her bosom always numb and cold. Sometimes her urgent need was more than she could bear. A trembling took her, an access of trembling which she could not check. At such times, if others were about her, she would sit vacant and speechless, smiling faintly for courtesy. Her eyes would brim over, the great drops fall unchecked. There would be no sobbing, very little catching of the breath. The well of misery would fill and overflow, gently and smoothly irresistible. Then the shaking would cease, and the fount would be dry for a season. So she grew more a spirit and less a maid. Her eyes waxed larger, and the pupils whelmed the gray in jet. The people of Malbank frankly took her for a saint. Martyrs, virgins, and such rare birds do not hop in every cage. But what more reasonable than that the famous abbot of St. Thorn should catch one in his own springes? Those who maintained that the chained white creature, who knelt folded at the Mass, or on a white palfrey rode out on the heath guarded by 2 monks, was the stormy girl who had kept swine about the middens, Mat's bad daughter, Iseult la Desirous. Those were leagued with the devil and his imps, who would not see a saint if all heaven walked the earth. The report fell in excellently with the abbot's calculation. No one believed in the Iseult fable save Maud, whom the girl had seen once or twice, and himself. Everyone talked rather of the chained virgin of St. Thorn. She became an object of pilgrimage. The abbot grew to call her chamber the feretory. The faithful gave alms, particularly the seamen from Wanmouth. Then others came to behold, more to his liking, proposing barter. She was observed of the Lord of Hartleap, the young Lord of Brokenbridge, the Lord of Courthope St. James, of the Baron of Starning and Parox, also from the East Domain. This Baron Malice, thin and stooping, having Prosper's quick eyes, without his easy lordship over all who met them, and Prosper's high voice twisted querulous, came to view his young brother's wife. She pleased, but the price did not please. He and the abbot haggled over the dowry. Malice, as obstinate as Prosper, would not budge. So they haggled. Finally came GALORS de Born, Lord of HAUTERIVE and many other places in the north, not to be denied. End of chapter 30.
Chapter 31 of the Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ryan S. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 31. Entra per me. When GALORS overshot his mark in Thornyhold, he flew very wide. It is well known there are no roads. Thornyhold is but the beginning of the densest patch of timber in all the forest. Malbank is your nearest habitation. Spenshaw, Heckabee, Dunsholt Thicket, Hartshold, Deerleap are forest names, not names of the necessities of men. You may wander a month, if you choose, telling one green hollow from another, or you may go to Holythorn at Malbank, or endure unto Wanmouth and the sea. If you were GALORS and needed counsel, you would not choose the wood. Naturally, you would avoid Malbank. There would remain to you Wanmouth. GALORS went to Wanmouth. It was the Countess's country, of course, but his disguise was good enough. People read the arms and hailed a la Guy, or one of that house. It was at Wanmouth that he learned what he wanted. Maurice, after one of his interminable chafferings with the Abbot Richard, took it on his way to the east. "My Lord Baron of Starning," said the Vice-Admiral of the port, "we have had a friend of your house here a week or more." Eh? Said Maurice, feeling his pocket. "What does the rogue want with his friendship? I'm as poor as a rat. Who is he?" "Oh, for that," replied the other, "he seems a great lord in his way. Wears your blazon, is free with his money, and he swears like a Fleming." "Bring him to me, Admiral, bring him to me. I shall like this man." So GALORS was brought in to be graciously received by the head of the house of Guy. His blunt manner deceived Maurice at once. In his experience, people who wanted to borrow dealt differently. Here was a lofty soul who might, on the other hand, be guided to lend. In the course of a long conversation, Maurice unbosomed. He was newly a lover and liked the part. The Baron ended his confession thus. "So, my dear friend, you see how it is with me. I have never met you before. The more's the pity. I accept your civilities, but I make no promises. You know our legend. Well, I bide my time. No boasting, but upon my honor, my reputation does not make me out ungrateful. I say to you, go to Malbank, observe, watch, judge, then report to me. The detail I leave to you. I should recommend a disguise. The place has become one of pilgrimage. Go as a pilgrim. You will see whether the prize is worth my while. I am sure you have taste. I know it. Observe, report. Then we will act." "Ravishment of ward?" asked GALORS dryly. "Ward? She is not his ward. How can she be? Who is she? Nobody knows. The thing is a crying scandal, my dear friend. A woman in an alley parlor, an alcove at Holy Thorn. We are Mohammedans, infidels, Jews of the old law? Fie!" "You do not know her name, Baron?" "She is the chained Virgin of St. Thorn, I tell you. She has no other name. She sits in a throne in choir, pale as milk, with burning grey eyes as big as passion flowers. She is a chained Andromeda on the rock of Peter. Be my Perseus." Said GALORS, half to himself. Yes, I will go at once." "My dear friend, not a word more, Baron. Go home to Starning. Go where you like, and wait. If you see me again, the lady will be with me." "You shall not find me ungrateful, I promise," cried Maurice, going out. "Damn your gratitude," said GALORS when the door was shut. A mortified Perseus in drab cloak and slouch hat, he went to Malbank next day and verified his prognosis. The abbot sang mass. His colleagues huddled in choir. The place echoed with the chastened snuffles he knew so well. Galors had no sentiment to pour over them, standing, bowing, genuflecting, singing himself at the bidding of the bell. He had no eyes for any but the frail apparition whose crown of black seemed to weigh her towards the pavement. The change wrought in her by a year's traffic might have shocked, as the eyes might have haunted him. But she was nothing but a symbol by now, a frayed ensign. She stood for an earldom and a fee. The time had been when her beauty had bewitched him. That was when she was flesh and blood, sun-browned, full of the sap of untamed desires. Now she was a ghost with a dowry, stricken but holding a fief. He judged the chain, the time, the place, the chances. He had 3 men. It was enough. Next Sunday he would act. Then for the forest roads and high march. That next Sunday was Lammas Day, and a solemn feast. All Malbank was in the nave, a beaten and weather-scarred bundle of drabs packed in one corner under the great vaulting ribs. Within the dark aisles the chapels gloomed. Here and there a red lamp made darkness darker. But the high altar was a blaze of lights. The faces, scarred or sharp-set, of the worshippers fronted the glory open-mouthed, but all dull. Hunger makes a bad altar flame. When it burns not sootily, it fires the fabric. Afterwards came something which they understood. Iseult between her 2 women, the monk behind, a girl chained by the middle to a monk. Oh, miracle! She sat very still in her carved chair, folding her patient hands. So thin, so frail, so transparent she was, they thought her pure spirit a wisp of gossamered breath, or one of those gauzy sublimations which the winter will make of a dead leaf. The cowed audience watched her wonderfully. Some of the women snivelled. The white monks, the singing boys, the banners and tapers, ceremonier, deacon, subdeacon, the vested abbot himself, passed like a shining cloud through the nave. All their light came from the chained Virgin of St. Thorn. And then the Mass began. There was a ring of hoofs outside, but no one looked round, and none came in. A shadow fell across the open door. At a Dominus Vobiscum you might have seen the ministrant falter. There might have been a second or 2 of check in his chant, but he mastered it without effort, and turned again with displayed hands to his affair. The choir of white hoods, however, watched the shadow at the west door. Iseult saw nothing and heard nothing. She was kneeling at prayer. It may be doubted if any prayed but the girl and the priest. The holy office proceeded. The Sanctus bell shrilled for the first time. Hooves shattered scandalously on the flags, and Galors, with an armed man on either hand of him, rode into the nave. The choir rose in a body. The nave huddled. Iseult, as she believed, saw Prosper, spear, crest, and shield. Her heart gave a great leap, then stood still. Perhaps there was a flicker in the abbot's undertone. His lips may have been dry, but his courage was beyond proof. He held on. Iseult was blanched as a cloth, lips, fingers, and ears, the tongue in her open mouth, all creeks for the blood were ebbed dry. Her awful eyes, fixed in sombre stars, threatened to gulf her in their dark. Love was drowned in such horror as this. Galors swung out of the saddle. In the breathless place the din of that act came like a thunder peal, crackling and crashing, like to wreck the church. He drew his sword with none to stay him, and strode forward. If the abbot Richard heard his step up the choir, the man is worthy of all memory, for he went on with his manual axe, and his murmur of prayer never ceased. He may have heard nothing. Who knows what his motions were? He was a brave man. The bell rang again. God beamed in the host. The people wavered, but use held. They bowed prone before God in his flake of new flesh. Deus in adjutorium, muttered the abbot to himself. Entra per me, thundered Galors, and ran him through the body. After the first shudder had swept through the church, there was no sound at all, until some woman hidden began a low moan, and keened the abbot Richard. No one dared to stir while those grim horsemen in the nave sat like rocks. Galors turned to Iseult, where she froze rigid in her throne, severed the chain at a blow, and went to take her. Some sudden thought struck him. He He turned her quickly round to the light, and without ceremony fumbled at her neck. She grew sick to feel him touch her. "The abbot have it!" Her lips formed the words. GALORS went back to the dead priest and pulled off chain and locket. "Oh, my ring, my ring!" whined the girl as he slipped the chain over her. He did not seem to hear her, but snatched her up in his arms as if she had been a doll and set her on his horse. He swung himself into the saddle behind her as he had swung himself out of it, reined up short and turned. The 3 men rode out with their burden. When they had gone, the deacon, who had got a mitre for it, solemnly laid the fallen host between his lord's lips. The act, at once pious and sensible, brought up the congregation from hell to earth again. At such times routine is the only saving thing. Once free of the abbey precincts, the 3 horsemen forded Wann. At a signal prearranged, one of them fell back to keep watch over the river. GALORS went forward with one in his company on to the heath, dropped him after 3 or 4 hours' steady going, and rode on still. His 3rd man was to meet him at the edge of myrtle brush. Never a word had he spoken since his great ENTRA permis, but without that, the act had been enough to tell his prize that whatever her chains had been before, the sword stroke had riveted them closer. There had been no chains like his mailed arm around her body. Nothing could be done. Indeed, she was as yet paralyzed. For wild work, as had been done in her sight, this was savagery undreamed. She could get no comfort. She never thought of Prosper. Even Prosper, her lord, could not stand before such a force as this. As for good Saint Isidore, the pious man became a shade, and vanished with his Creator into the dark. Night came on, but a low yellow moon burnt the fringe of the rising woods. They were retracing almost the very stones of the track she and Prosper had followed a year before. Matt's intake they passed. She saw a light in the window. The heath loomed ghostly before them, with the dark bank of trees rising steadily as they neared. Athwart them rose also the moon. There was a promise of a fine still night. They entered the trees, heading for Martlebush. Suddenly GALORS pulled up, listening intently. There was no sound save that strange murmur the night has, as if the whole concave of heaven were the hollow of a shell, and the secret rustling of the trees. Still GALORS listened. It was so quiet, you might almost have heard 2 hearts beating. As an underchant, sinister accompaniment to the voices of the night, there came to them the muffled pulsing of a horse's hoofs, a quick and regular sound, a horse galloping evenly with plenty in hand. Both heard it. GALORS drove in the spurs, and the chase began. They were yet a mile away from Martlebush. If they could cross the brook and gain the ridgeway, it was long odds on their being overtaken that night. End of chapter 31.
Chapter 32 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 32. Bide the Time. Walking the rounds of HAUTERIVE the night of his coming there, a man sprang out at Prosper from a black entry and stabbed at him between the shoulders. "For the ravisher of Iseult," was all the message that did not miscarry, for Galor's mail of proof stopped the rest. Prosper whipped round in an instant, but the assassin had made up the passageway. There was a quick chase through the breakneck lanes of the steep little town, then blood told. Prosper ran his man to earth in a churchyard. He proved to be a red-haired country lout, whose bandy legs had been against him in this work. He asked for no quarter, but seemed to be beside himself with rage. "Friend," said Prosper, "you struck me from behind. You must have wished to make very sure." "Why?" said FALVE. "Thou ravisher Galors!" "I cannot be called Galors to my face. Politics may go to the devil. Keep my secret, countryman. I am in Galor's shell, but I will be Galors no more." FALVE dropped on his knees. "Oh, my lord, my lord!" he began to cry out. Enough of lords, said Prosper. Some of them do not do very lordly, I grant you. Your words touched me nearly. Be so good as to make yourself plain. Who is Iseult? Iseult la Désirieuse, my wife, monsieur. Your wife? Cried Prosper, grinding his teeth. As good as that, my lord. I should have married her in the morning if my mother hadn't played the Turk on me. So we had the whole story out of him. Prosper learnt that Iseult had been put in her way to safety by the old woman, who immediately after had made that way the most perilous of all, with the best intentions always. Master FALVE, I am your debtor, said Prosper at the end. I wish you good evening. Monsieur, will you not find my wife? Your wife again, sirrah, said he, turning sharply. Ah, my lord, if you have any ill will to that. I have the greatest possible ill will, my man, because she is already my own. Heaven round about us! Was there ever such a married woman? Cried poor FALVE, tearing his hair. The politics of a lady to whom, as far as he then knew, he owed no service, held Prosper till the morning. The rest of the night he spent walking the ramparts. At the first flutter of light he beat up the garrison, assembled the men of both parties, and declared himself. HAUTERIVE returns to its allegiance, said he. Conradin le Lamport is commandant. The former garrison will deliver up all arms and take the oath of fealty. A declaration of hue and cry is posted for GALORS, with a reward for his head. In 3 days' time the Countess will send her viceroy to claim the keys. Gentlemen, I bid you good morning. Conradin de Lamport was the name of the man who had accompanied him into WANMEETINGS. Prosper knew he was to be trusted. Then, with conscience cleared, he mounted his horse and left HAUTERIVE. Keeping a sharp lookout as he went, he was rewarded by the find of a shoe, glowing like a crimson toadstool in the moss. Not far off were its fellow, and a pair of drenched silk stockings. He kissed the vestiges of the feet of Iseult, hung them to the peak of the saddle, and forward again like a westerly gale. After this came a fault which delayed him the best part of 3 days. The deer were dumb animals for him, whose business had hitherto been to bleed, not milk them. There were deer feeding in the glades of Thornyhold, but Belvisée was nursing her wound under the oak by the pool, and Mellifont was beside her. The deer snuffed an enemy in the friend of their friend. They gave him a lead astray, which unconsciously he took. Thus he found himself, after 2 days' aimless wandering and 2 nights' dreamless sleep, on the high ground by Deerleap, with the forest behind, and the rolling purple fells stretched out before him, and at last a blue gauzy ribbon which he knew for the sea. Out of heart he turned and beat back to Thornyhold, this time to better purpose. A rustle in the fern, a start, a glint of the sun on a side not furry, a flash of flying green and russet, a streamer of hair like a litten cloud. By heavens, how the brown girl ran! Prosper, laughing but keen, gave chase. She led him far, in and out of the oak stems, doubling like a hare, but he rode her down by cutting off the corners. Flushed, panting and wild, defiant she stood, ready to flinch at the blow. Prosper's horse was properly breathed. As for him, he burst into a laugh. My child, you bolted like a rabbit. But own that I gave you a good run. You beat me, said Mellifont. Well, and now I am going to do what I like with you. Of course. You must be obedient. Answer my question now. Why did you run? Because you came. Why did you run? Because you are a man. Madam Virgin, what a prude! Did you think I should hurt you? Yes. Well, have I? Not yet. Look at me now. Do I look like hurting you? He put up his visor. The softest brown eyes a girl can have trembled over him. No. Oh! The negative was drowned in discovery. Prosper followed her gaze. He held up the red stockings. Do you know them, child? I know to whom they belong. Are you going to hunt her? Hunt her? I am going to find her. I think she has had hunting enough, God bless her. Yes, she has, said Mellifont gravely. Prosper stooped in his saddle and laid a hand on her head. My dear, said he, I love that hunted lady beyond everything in the world. I never knew how much until I had lost her. But no wrong will happen to her till she hears me tell her the truth. If you know anything, you must not hide it from me." Mellifont peered up at him through her hair. "Are you Prosper?" she asked. "Yes, I am indeed. Did she speak to you about me?" "Often." "Is she— Lord of Hosts, she is not here." "No, not now. She was here. Come with me, but you must leave your horse and sword behind you." Prosper obeyed her without a thought. Mellifont took his hand and led him to the hollow under the oak. Bellivisé was there, dumbly nursing her side, which a stooping hind was licking when the pair came up. Prosper received the red robe and the sequins from her hands, and in time pieced the story together. It cut him to the soul. "Take me to the place where the dogs got her," he said in a whisper. Bellivisé and Mellifont led him there. Once more, then, he wasted his eyes on crushed herbage, black fern, and stained earth. Again loathed himself very heartily for what he had not done, but in time understood what he had done. He turned deliberately to the sisters. "Bellivisé and Mellifont, listen to what I tell you. There is no strength like a woman's, and no blindness like that of a man. For the woman is strong because she is blind and cannot see the man she loves as he is. Therefore she makes him in her own glorious image. But the man is blind because he is strong, and because he seeth himself so glorious that he can abide no other near him save as a servant. In that he doth deadly sin to love, because the food of love is service, and he that serves not love starves him. But the woman feedeth him with her own milk, so love is with her till she dies. I, by the mercy of God, have learned what love is, and can feed him with service. And Iseult la Désireuse has taught me, who is now Iseult la Désirée." Prosper ceased. Mellifont was crying on Bellivisé's shoulder. The latter said, "Prosper, if all men were like thee, we might leave the forest and dwell with them." "Come with me," he said, "and I will see you safely bestowed." "No, no, we will stay where we are known and with whom we know. All men are not like you." "As you must, it must needs be," replied Prosper. He kissed each on the cheek, and watched them go hand in hand down the glade. The herd closed in upon them, so neither he nor the argument knows them any more. Prosper knelt down to pray, but what he found set him to better work. He found Iseult's wedding ring. "By God," he cried, "who made men labor, I will pray with my hands this turn." He ran for his horse and sword. Courage came with his gallop, courage and self-esteem, without which no man ever did anything yet. With self-esteem returned sober thought. "I can do Maltbank in 3 or 4 hours. There is light enough for what I have to settle there. I will spare my horse and save time in the end. Meantime I will think this affair out." So said Prosper galloping to Prosper on his feet, the late moralist. His plan was very simple, to confront the abbot with his ring. If that failed, he would scour his own country, raise a troop, and lay leaguer on St. Thorn. He had forgotten GALORS. He was soon to have a reminder of that grim fighter. The doors of the great church stood open, so Prosper rode in. It was cold and dark, and smelt of death and candle fumes. The pilasters of the nave were already swathed in black velvet. In the choir were great lights set on the floor, in the midst of them a bier. A priest was at a little altar by the bier's head. Other cowled figures crouched about it. There was a low murmur of praying, even whining and mechanical. On the bier Prosper saw the comely Abbot Richard Dieudonné, in cope and mitre, holding in his hand the staff of his high office. This pastor of the church was at peace. The man of the world was sober with access of wisdom. The man of modes smiled pleasantly at his secret thoughts. Very handsome, very remote, very pure he looked, for so death purges off the dross which we work into the good clay. Prosper, meditative always at the sight of death, stood and pondered upon it. Everything was well, no doubt. Such things should be. But the indifference of the defunct seemed almost shocking. Do they not care for decent interment? Then he turned to a bystander. "You mourn for your father?" he asked. "Master, we do indeed. What, a great lord, a throned and pompous priest, to be felled like a calf, his body spitted like a lark's, no leave asked. You may well judge whether we mourn. I suppose there never was such a mournful affair since the king died in this country." "Murdered!" cried Prosper, highly scandalized. "Murdered by Prosper Legay for the sake of the chained virgin." "By Prosper Legay?" "'Tis so indeed, and well he did his work, if there's anything in wrist play. For first he spits the abbot, and then he sunders the chain, and next he overhauls the girl, and next the abbot, and he puts her under his arm like a marketable hen, and away he gallops over the heath. Hot work." "Galor's work," said Prosper to himself as he turned away. He prayed at 3 altars for the man's soul, turned, mounted, and galloped. He forded Wan. A horseman met him on the further bank, shouting. Prosper lowered his head and shot at him as from a catapult. The spear drove deep. The man threw his arms out, sobbed, and dropped like a stone. Prosper went on his race. It was growing dusk when he stood on the threshold of Matt's intake, battering at the door. The hag-ridden face of old Maud stared out. She parted her tattered hair from her eyes and pointed a shaky finger at him. "Galors!" she wailed. "Galors! Thou monk forsworn, thinking thou to have the much desired. No, but her husband has her at last, and shall have her with all that is hers. Ah, though he have done murder to get her! Swear back, Galors, and pray for thy dead master." Prosper held up his hand to stay the tide. "Mother, I am Prosper, the husband of the much desired. No murder have I done, though I have seen murder, and I have not my wife, but I believe she is with Galors." Old Maud came fawning out to him at this, and took his hands in her own trembling hands. "He passed an hour agone," said she. "He will do her no wrong till he has set her at high march. Trust him for that. And by now he should be near Martel, and she before him on the saddle-bow." She began to weep and wag her silly head. Prosper made to go, having no time to waste, but "Stop," she quavered, "and hear me out. Though the Abbot Richard was murdered at his prayers, yet withal he got his deserts, for he hatched a worse wrong than ever Galor's did. The child was chained by the middle, and came to me chained riding a white palfrey. In green and white she came, and round her middle was a chain, long and supple, and a monk on horseback held the end thereof. She came to me to the hearth at the length of her chain, and held me in her dear arms, and kissed me, cheeks and forehead. Down I sat on my stool, and she on her knees of me, and she hid her face on my leanness while she spoke of you, my lord, called you her dear heart, and told me of all the bitter longing she had. Ah, now, if you but knew!" "God forgive me," cried the lacerated wretch, "but I know it all. Yet tell me what else she said." "There was little more," said Maud, "for the monk pulled at her, and she went as she came." "Have they passed an hour gone?" said Prosper in a dry whisper. "Ay, and more." "God be with you," said he. "Pray for her." "Pray!" mocked the crone in a rage. "And pray what will that do?" "No more than I, mother, just now. God is all about us. Farewell." And he was gone amid flying peats. Midway of the heath a second knight met him, challenged him, and charged. Prosper was not for small game that night. His head grew cooler, as always, for his haste, his arm steady as a rock. Thereupon he ran his man through the breastbone. He broke his spear, but took the others, and away. At the end of the wood the moon rays gleamed a third time upon Mail. It was Galor's last sentry, who hallooed to stay him. Prosper was on him before he was ready, and hurled him from the saddle. He never moved. Prosper galloped through the wood. The snapping branches, thunder of hoofs, laboring belly and hard-worn breath of his beast, more than all the wind that sang in his ears, prevented him from hearing what Galor's and his prey had already heard. He went headlong down the slope of the ground, but before anything more welcome he caught the music of the brook in the bottom. There was a gap in the trees just there. The moon swam in the midst, large and golden. At last he saw what he wanted, and knew that the hour had come. End of chapter 32. Recording by Todd. Chapter 33 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 33. Salomon is driven home. GALORS, too, knew that the hour had come, but his spirit came up to meet it, and he made a push for it. He was over the brook. If he could top the ridge, he would have the advantage he had a year ago, which this time he swore to put to better use. The girl knew his thoughts as she had known the accolade of the thundering hoofs behind them. She would have thrown herself if the steel trap had loosened ever so little. As it was, she fluttered like a rag caught in a bush. The filmy body was what GALORS held. The soul shrilled prayers to the man's confusion. He could not stay her lips. They moved, working against him, as he knew well. "Mother of God! Send him! Send him! Send him!" It was ill fighting against a girl's soul. It slacked his rein and drugged his heel. By God! Let the boy come and be damned. Let him fight. "Mother of God! Send! Send! Send!" breathed Iseult. The horse below them shuddered, failed to come up to the rein, bowed his head to the jerked spur. GALORS left off spurring and slackened his rein. Though he would not look behind him, he heard the plash of the ford, heard also Prosper's low, "Steady, mare, hold up." Prosper was over. GALORS halfway up the hill. It would be soon. The black and white gained hand over hand. The red and green felt him come. The soul of Iseult hovered between them. Black and white drew level. Red and green held on. Side by side, spears erect and tapering into the moon, plumes nodding, eyes front, they paced. The soul of Iseult took flight. The body crouched in the steel's hug. The gleam of the white wicket gates caught their master's eye. They were risen in judgment against him. Entre Perme was to play him false. This trifling thing unnerved him till it seemed to speak a message of doom. But doom, once read and accepted, nerve came back. By God, he would die as he had lived, strenuously, seeking one thing at a time. But to be killed by his chosen arm, overshrilled by his own shout, that sobered him, little of a sentimentalist as he was. As for lovelorn Prosper, he had still less sentiment to waste. True, he had not chosen his arms. His motto had been found for him by his ancestors. They were cut and dried affairs, so much clothing to which GALORS at this moment served as a temporary peg. Sweet Saviour! The much desired was near him, close by. He could have touched her head. She never moved to look at him. He knew so much without turning his own head. And he knew further that she knew him there. The soul of Iseult, you see, had taken wings. Thus they gained the ridge and halted. Backing their beasts, they were face to face, and each looked shrewdly at the other, waiting who should begin the game. Then it was that Iseult suddenly sat up and looked at Prosper. He could not read her face, but knew by her stiff-poised head that she was quivering. He said nothing, but made a motion, a swift jerk with his head to wave her out of the way. GALORS responded by first tightening, finally relaxing his hold upon her waist. She slipped down from the saddle and stood hesitating what to do. She had waited for this moment so long that the natural thing had become the most unnatural of all. Prosper never glanced at her, but kept his eyes steadily on GALORS. The times, in his mannish view, were too great for lovers. Iseult stepped back into the shadows. The two men at once saluted in knightly fashion, wheeled, and rode apart. The lists were a long alley between the pines, all soft moss and low scrub of whortleberry and heather. GALORS had the hill behind him, but no disadvantage in that unless he were pushed down it. The place was dead level. They were halted at some 30 yards interval, waiting. Then Prosper gave a shout. "Bide your time!" "Entre Perme!" came as a sombre echo, and the two spurred horses flung forward at each other. Each spear went true. Prosper got his into the center of GALORS' shield, and it splintered at the guard. GALORS hit fair, but Prosper used his trick of dropping at the impact, so that the spear glanced off over his shoulder. GALORS recovered it and his seat together. It would seem that Prosper had taught him some civility by this, for he threw his lance away as soon as the horses were free of each other. Both drew their swords. Then followed a bout of wheeling and darting in, at which Prosper had clear advantage as the lighter horseman on the handier horse. GALORS' strength was in downright carving, Prosper's in his wrist play and lightning recovery. He, moreover, was cool, GALORS hot. At this work he got home thrice to the others once, but that once was for a memory, starred the shoulder-piece a bit to the bone. Left arm lucky. Prosper made a feint at a light canter, spurred when he was up with his man, and as his horse plunged, got down a backstroke, which sent GALORS' weapon flying from his hand. He turned sharply and reined up. GALORS dismounted slowly, picked up his sword, and went to mount again. He blundered it twice, shook the blood out of his eyes, tried again, but lurched heavily and dropped. He only saved himself by the saddle. Prosper guessed him more breathed than blooded. "GALORS," said he, "we have done well enough for the turn. Rest, and let me rest." "As you will," said GALORS thickly. The two men sat facing each other on either side of the way. GALORS unlaced his helm and leaned on his elbows, taking long breaths. Prosper unlaced his, and then followed a lesson to Iseult in warfare as he understood it. The girl had run down the hillside to the brook, so soon as she saw they must give over. She now came back, bearing between her hands a broad leaf filled with water. This she brought to her lord. Prosper smiled to her. "Take it to GALORS, Iseult, whom we must consider as our guest," he whispered. She turned at once and went dutifully, with recollected feet and bosom girt in meekness, to give him the cold water cupped in her palms. GALORS drank greedily and grunted his thanks. As for Prosper, he praised men and angels for a fair vision. She came back after another journey to feed her lover, and afterwards stood as near to him as she dared. GALORS, the alien, looked ever at the ground. "GALORS," said Prosper presently, "how do you find my harness?" "It has served me its turn," he answered. "That also I can say of yours," replied Prosper with a little laugh, "for it has taken me into places where, without it, I should have found a straight-gate inn. For that I can thank you more than for the headache and cold bath at GOLTRES." "Ah," said the other, "that was a sheer knock. I thought it had finished you, to be plain. But do not lay it to my door. I fight truer than that." "True enough you have fought me this night," Prosper allowed heartily, "and I ask no better. But will you now tell me one thing about which I have been curious ever since our encounter in this place a year ago?" "What is it?" "Your arms, the blazon, do you bear them as of right?" "I bear them by the right a fighter has. They have carried me far and done my work." "They are not of your family?" "My family? Monsieur, you should know that a monk carries no arms. My family, moreover, was not knightly, till I made it knightly." "The arms you assumed with your new profession?" "I did." "May I know whence you took them?" "No, I cannot tell you that. They are the arms of a man now dead, Salomon de Montguichet." "They are the arms," said Prosper slowly, "of a man now dead. I saw him dead, and helped to bury him. I knew not then how he died, though I have thought to be sure since. But you are wrong in one thing. The bearer of those arms was not Salomon de Montguichet." "It is you who are wrong, monsieur. It is beyond doubt, and the proof is that on the shield of the Guichets, taken from the name." "GALORS, the name was taken from the Guichets, and the Guichets from Cold Scar in the north. The man's name was Salomon de Born." GALORS gave a dry sob, and another, and another. He threw up his arms, twisting with the gesture of a man on a rope. Prosper and Iseult rose also, Prosper pale and hard, the girl wide-eyed. GALORS seemed to tear at himself, as if at war with a fiend inside him. Prosper stepped forward. You would not have known his voice. "Man," he said, "our account is not yet done. But I know what I know. If you have accounts to settle, settle them now. I will bear you company and wait for you where you will." The words steadied GALORS, sobered and quieted him. he began to mutter to himself, God has spoken to me. Out of my own deeds cometh his judgment, and out of my own sowing the harvest I shall reap. Entre per me, saith God. He turned to Prosper. Sir, I accept of your allowance. I will not take you far. One more thing I will ask at your hands. Did you give me back my own sword? Salomon's sword. After a little you shall have it again. I will do it, said Prosper, knowing his thought. They changed swords. Prosper set Iseult on his horse, and himself walked at her stirrup. The three of them moved forward without another word given or exchanged. GALORS led the way. Instead of following the line of the chase, which had been north, they now struck east through the heavy woodland. So they went for some 3 hours. It must have been near midnight, with the moon clear of all trees, when they halted at a cross-ride which ran north and south. Before them, over the ride, rose a thick wall of pine stems, so serried that there was no room for a horse to pass in between them. Iseult started, looked keenly up and down the ride, then collected herself and sat quite still. Prosper took no notice of anything. Prosper, said GALORS quietly, you will wait for me here. You know that I shall return. It will be within half an hour from now. Good. I shall be here. GALORS dismounted and plunged into the wall of pines. They seemed to move and fold him in their mazes, and nothing spoke of him thereafter but the sound of his heavy tread on dry twigs. When this was lost, an immense stillness sat brooding. Neither Prosper nor Iseult could speak. Her presence was to him a warm consolation, to be apprehended by flashes in the course of a long battle with black and heavy thoughts. Her also the pause, more fateful than the battle it had interrupted, affected strangely, the more strangely because she did not know the whole truth. I may say here that Prosper never told her of it, nor did she ask it of him. It was the one event of their lives, joint and disjoint, upon which they were always as dumb as now when they thought apart. Thoughtful apart though they were, they felt together. Prosper's hand stole upwards from his side. Iseult's drew to it as metal to magnet. The rest of that heavy hour they passed hand in hand. So children comfort each other in the dark. Very faint, and far off a solitary cry broke the vast dearth of the night. It rose like an owl's hooting, held, shuddered, and then died down. Prosper's clasp on the girl's hand suddenly straightened. It held convulsively while the call held, relaxed when it relaxed. Then the former hush swam again over the wood, and so endured until, after intolerable suspense, they heard the heavy tread of GALORS de Born. His bulk, his white impassive mask, were before them. I have settled my account, Prosper, he said. Now settle yours. Prosper shivered. I am quite ready, said he. They changed, then crossed swords, and began their second rally on foot. You would have said that they were sluggish at the work, as if their blood had cooled with a long wait or sense of still, more dreadful business in the background, and needed a sting to one or the other to set it boiling again. They fenced almost idly at first. It was cut and parry, formalism. GALORS was very steady. Prosper, breathing tightly through his nose, very wary. Gradually, however, they warmed to it. GALORS got a cut in the upper arm and began making ugly rushes, blundering, uncalculated bustles, which could only end one way. Prosper had little difficulty in evading most of these. GALORS lost his breath, and with it his temper. The sight of his own shield and sword, ever at point against him, made him mad. He could never reach his adroit enemy, it seemed. For a supreme effort he feigned, drew back, and then made a rush. Prosper parried, recovered, and let in with a staggering head-cut which, for the time, dizzied his opponent. GALORS lowered his head under his shield, made another desperate blind rush, and got to close quarters. The two men struggled together, fighting as much with shields as swords, and more with legs and arms than anything else. They were indistinguishable, a twisting and flashing tangle. They locked, writhed, swayed, tottered, then rent asunder. GALORS fell heavily. He got on his feet again, however, for another rush. As he came on, Prosper stepped aside, knocked out his guard, and slashed at the shoulder. A dreadful, thirsty blow. GALORS staggered. His shield dropped, but he came on once more. Another side-cut beat his weapon down, and then a backhanded blow crashed into his gorget. He threw up his arms and staggered backward. A last cut finished him. GALORS, with a cough that ended in a wet groan, fell like lead. He never spoke nor moved again. Prosper sat on his knees, beaten out. Isolde started from the wood to hold him, but he waved her back. All was not done. He put his sword in his mouth and crept on all fours to his enemy, lifted his visor, looked in his face. Then he got up and stood over him. He swung back the bare sword of Salomon de Board with both hands. It came down, did its last work, and broke. Prosper threw the pommel from him and lifted up the head of GALORS. The times were grim times. He tied it to the saddle-bow. Then he turned to Isolde. "Come," he said. "The fight is done." They did not stay. He took his own shield and sword from the dead, girt on the first, and slung the latter to the spare saddle. He took his wife in his arms, not daring to kiss her in such a place, and put her on GALOR's horse, and so they went their way into the misty woods. Dark Torrentier took up the watch amid the sighing of the pine-tree host. Its array of shields, its swords and mail kept their counsel. The figures in the singular tapestry of Troilus went through their aping unadmired, and the grey dawn found them at it. Then you might see how idle Cressid, peering askance at Malfrey with her sly eyes, watched the black pool drown her hair. End of chapter 33. Recording by Todd.
Chapter 34 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jack Callie. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 34. La Désirée. Prosper broke the silence there was between them. "Whither should we go?" Isolde took the lead. "Follow me. I will lead you. I know the ways." A great constraint kept him tongue-tied. The prize was his. The silence, the emptiness, the night, gave him what his sword had earned. He trembled, but dared not put out his hand. What was he, good Lord, to touch so rare a thing? He hardly might look at her. The moon showed him a light, muffled figure, swaying to the rhythm of the march, the round of her hooded head, the swing of her body, the play of her white hand on the rein. Whenever he dared to look, her face was turned to his. He saw the moon glint in her eyes. He absolutely had nothing to say, and for the first time in his life felt a clumsy fool. By all which it would seem that love is a virtue going out of a man as much as any that enters in. Isolde was in a very different plight, enjoying her brief moment of triumph, making as it were the most of it. When a woman loves, she humbles herself, and every prostration is a matter for an ecstasy. Her love returned. She ventured to be proud, but this is against the grain. It is more blessed to give. The freed soul welcomes the prison gates and hugs the yoke and the chain. Just now she was on the verge of her freedom. In thus looking at him who had been her lord yesterday and would be her lord tomorrow, she was taking his measure. In her exalted mood, she found that she could read him like a book. There was no doubt about his present docility, but could she dare to mold it? She must woo, she saw. Dare she trail this steel-armed lord of battles, this grim executant, this trumpet of God, as a led child by her girdle ribbons? If hero he had proved in his own walk, to be sure he shambled pitifully on the edge of hers. Her superiority sparkled so hard and frosty bright that she began to pity him. And so the maid thought to be the mother of her man. Isolde knew she must beguile him now, for his soul's ease and her own. When the ride grew broad and ran like a spit into the lake of soft dark, she stopped. There was moss here. There were lichened heather roots, rowan bushes, and a ring of slim birches, silver-shafted, feather-crowned and light. More than all, there was a little pool of water which 2 rills fed. "We will stay here," said Isolde. Prosper dismounted and helped her down. She felt him trembling as he held her, whereat her courage rose clear and high. "I will disarm you." Had she not done it indeed? "And dress your hurts, then you shall rest, and I look at you at last."
"I am not much hurt. We could well go on."
"Nay, you must let me do as I will now. I must disarm you. 'Tis my right." She did it, kneeling at his knees or standing before him. For once he was the delight of a woman in love. Her plaything, her toy, her baby, in a word. She girdled him with her arms at need, her fingers busy at neck or cheek. Pieces unlaced the helm. "Now kneel." He obeyed her, and she grew tenderly deft over his wounds. She washed them clean, bound them up with strips torn from her skirt. She pushed back his hair from eyes and brows, and washed him clean of blood and sweat and rage. Her petticoat was her towel. She would have used her hair, but that she dared not lose command of herself and him. She wished for once to draw him, not to be drawn. She knelt down on the moss, touching her lap meaningly as she did so. "Rest here," said the gesture. "Rest here, my dear heart," said the smile that flew with it. He knelt beside her. All went well up to this. The moon was low, the night wearing, but the pure light came flowing through a rent in the trees, and she caught his look upon her. She tried, but she could not meet it. Then it befell her that she would not meet it if she could. Prosper took something from his breast. "Look," he said, as he held it up. She watched it quivering in the moonbeams. Her eyes brimmed. She grew blush-red, divinely ashamed.
"Hold your hand out,"
said Prosper. She had risen to her knees, and they were kneeling face to face, very near. Isolde's hands were crossed at her neck. Prosper remembered the gesture. Now she held out her left hand and let him crown it. He held on. Alas, he was growing master every minute.
"Isolde."
"Yes?"
"Oh, my dear love, Isolde. Now I shall wed thee, Isolde, the much desired."
She began to shake, but she put her hands up till they rested on his shoulders. She laughed in a low, thrilled tone. "I am la désirée now, and no longer la désirée. For what I desired was another's desire." Also she said, "Kiss my mouth, and I shall believe that thou speakest the truth of the heart." He held her with his hands, looking long and steadily, nor did her eyes refuse him now. Love was awake and crying between the pair. He drew her nearer, kissed her on the eyes and on the mouth, and she grew red and loved him dearly. So in the soft night, under the forest trees, in the hush that falls before dawn, those two kissed and comforted one another. It was in a field of blood that the rod of love thrust into flower at last. But the forest, which had seen the graft, held the flower by right. None watched their espousal save the trees and the mild faces of the stars. End of Chapter 34. Recording by Jack Callie. Chapter 35 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jack Callie. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 35. Forest Love. With the sun rose Isolde, transfigured and glorified, love's rosy priest. She slipped from her man's arms, hung over him wonderfully, lightly kissed his forehead without disturbing his sleep. Then she went to bathe herself in the pool and to bind up her hair. The woodland was jeweled with dew. It went in misty green and yellow, all vocal of the joy she had. She was loved. She was loved. Fresh and full of light, she came dancing back, without a trace of the haggard beauty upon her which had stolen about the ways of holy Thorn. Her mouth had the divine childishness and the rippling curves of the naked god's bow. Her eyes were glossy soft and rayed a light from within. Warm arms stole round Prosper, a warm cheek by his. Warm lips kissed him awake. The duet as of two low answering doves began.
Is this La Désirée who cometh?
You called me Désirée.
How long sought, how long prayed for.
Found now, and close at last.
Closer yet, closer yet.
O heart, O desire! Prosper.
Yes?
Tell me one thing.
Ask.
When began you to think of me?
Wilt thou put me to shame, Isolde?
Never, never. There is no shame in you. Look what I am.
The purest, the loveliest, the bride of all delight.
You are a great lord, and I...
The great lord's lady, out of his reach.
Prosper! No, no. If I am out of reach, reach not for me. Tell me instead what I ask you.
But you know when I began, and what you said.
Ah, was it then?
No, it was not then. It was after that. It was when I knew that you loved me.
Did you not know from the first? Oh, what men must be! And I called as I was called.
La Désirée? Ah, yes. Tell me now why that was.
Yes, I will tell you now. She hid her face on his breast and whispered her story. I was 12 years old, a sheep girl on Marlbury Down. There are many, many herds there, and 5 of us that kept them that day, huddling together to be warm. For I was cold enough, in rags as you have seen me, but worse. My shoulder and my side went bare then. Then there came riding over the brow a company of lords having falcons on their wrists, and I stood up to watch them fly their birds. There was an old man, tall and very noble, with white hair and beard, and a brown keen face. And there were others, young men, and one was a lad, his son. The lad it was who flew his bird at a heron. The falcon shot up into the air. She towered over my head where I stood, and after stooped and fell upon me, and clung to my raiment, pecking at my heart. And I cried out at the sharpness of the pain, and wrestled with the falcon to get her off me, but could not for the battling of her sails. Then the lad, the owner of the hawk, rode up to me and took away the bird and killed her. He was a ruddy lad, with the bright blue eyes of his father, but his hair was long and yellow as gold. To me he gave money, and what was dearer than money, and rarer, gentle words. For he said, Maiden, my haggard hath done thee a wrong, and I through her. But when I am a man, I will amend it. Now the wound over my heart kept fresh and could never be healed, and I was thought shameful for that, because men said I went bleeding for love, and God knows it was a true saying.
Oh, Isolde, was it true? Was it true? For that old man was my father, and the lad was I,
said Isolde. Ah, when thou didst ride into the quarry, and foundest me with GALORS there, I knew thee again. And when thou didst wed me, the wound stayed bleeding but remained fresh. But now it is healed. They turned their lips to each other, and murmured comfort with kisses.
By the Lord, cried he, I could eat a meal.
O greedy one, I will put you to shame. All my desire is to take God's body, for I know that we have had no marriage mass.
That is a true saying, but the host is harder to come by. There is a place in Maugron, nevertheless, where you may hear mass and break good bread after. I have been there, but not from here.
But I have been there too, Prosper, and from here, or near here. I remember, I know the road.
Come then, lead me, my bride.
She armed her lord, being now entered into her old self, radiant, softly fair, guarded and demure. He also was the man of her choosing, invincibly lord. They found their beasts nearby, and were soon on their way, with the pale trophy hidden in a cloth. Mass was said by the time they reached the yew tree close, and saw the shrine and image of St. Lucy of the Eyes. Alice of the Hermitage came out into the open, shading her face against the sun. Prosper she remembered not, but when she saw Isolde she gave a little cry. The two girls were in each other's arms in no time. "Oh, you! Yes, I have come back. And you know me like this. I would know you anywhere by what you can never cut off." "Now you must know my lord," said Isolde with a great heart. Prosper came up.
"Ah, damsel," says he, "you sped me into your forest, and so sped me to my happiness in spite of myself. Have you forgotten the white bird? Look again and tell me if I have redeemed the quest."
Ah, said glowing Alice. "Now I remember my dream of the bird. Is this possible?"
She looked at Isolde. Isolde blushed, but she was all for blushing just now.
"If it is true," Alice continued, "you make me very happy. Now let me serve you."
"You shall," said Prosper. "Pray give us something to eat."
"Alice," said Isolde, "it was my lord who taught me how to pray. To Mother Mary and Saint Isidore. We have had no marriage mass." "Ah, that is serious. You are not yet wedded, then?"
Isolde blushed again.
"Will the Father wed us?" she contented herself to ask.
But Prosper would have none of it. "Nay, by God and his Christ, but we are one soul by now," he cried. "The year of agony for her, the year of schooling for me is past. God has upheld my arm, and her heart is mine. But I beg of you, Alice, prevail upon the priest to give us his God and ours. For though we have been wedded by a churchman, we have not been wedded by the church."
"The Father shall do it," said Alice. "Fear nothing." There were two scruples in the good man's way. If he said Mass twice in the morning, he broke the law of the church. If he put off his breakfast, he broke that of nature, which bids a man fill when he is empty. And the priest was a law-abiding man. In the end, however, the bride and bridegroom had their marriage mass. Kneeling on the mossy stone, they received the sop. Alice of the Hermitage brought 2 crowns of bryony leaves and scarlet berries. So Maugron anointed what Maugron had set apart. The postulants were adept. Afterwards, when the priest had gone and all things were accomplished, Alice of the Hermitage kissed a sister and a brother, and then, very happily, they broke their bread sitting in the sun. "Whither now, my lord?" asked Isolde when they had done.
"Ah, to High March, pardieu," Prosper said. "There is a little work left for me there. You shall go in as a queen this time. Clothe her as a queen, Alice, and let us be off."
Alice took her away to be dressed in the red silk robe. She drew on the silk stockings, the red slippers. Then she went to tie her hair. "Stay," said Isolde, "and tell me something first." "What is it, dearest?" "My hair. How far does it reach by now?" "Oh, it is a mantle to you, a dusky veil falling to your knees." Now bind it up for me, Alice. It has run to its tether. The glossy tower was roped with sequins. The bride was ready. Alice adored her. "Come and meet the bridegroom," said she. Prosper watched them coming over the sunny plat. He was not lettered, yet he should have heard the whisper of the amorist.
"Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes."
At least he bowed his knee before her. She could have answered him then. "I am as a wall, and my breast like towers. Then was I in his eyes as one that found favour." "Goodbye, my sister Desiree," said Alice of the Hermitage. Tears and kisses met and answered each other. "Surely here is love enough," she cried as they rode away. For my part, I am disposed to agree with her, but Prosper found her glorious.
Can our Lord have enough of incense, or his mother weary of songs? Can La Désirée sicken of desire?
For 2 more nights, Gris-Morgon made their bed. End of Chapter 35. Recording by Jack Callie.
Chapter 36 of The Forest Lovers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett. Chapter 36. The Lady Pietosa de Bréauté. Evidently they were expected at High March, for no sooner the white plumes had cleared the forest purlieu and came nodding over the heath in view of the solemn towers, than a white flag was run up the keep. It floated out bravely, a snow patch in a pure sky. "Peace, hey?" quoth Prosper, asking, "Well then, there shall be peace if they will take it. It is for them to settle." Iseult said nothing. She had no reason to welcome High March or to attend a welcome. She might have doubted the wisdom of their adventure had she been less newly a wife. As it was, she would have followed her man into the jaws of hell. When they drew closer still, they could see that the great gates were set open and the drawbridge let down. Soon the guard turned out and presented arms. Then issued in good order a white-robed procession, girls and boys bareheaded, holding branches of palm. A rider in green marshalled them with a long white wand which he had in his right hand. It was all very curious. "I should know that copper-headed knave," said Prosper. "It is the Seneschal, dear lord," said Iseult, who would know him better, "with his white rod of office." Prosper gave a mighty shout. "Master Porges, by the Holy Rood! Oh, Master Porges, Master Porges, have you not yet enough of rods, white or black? Look how the rascal wags the thing. Why, hark, child, he's set them singing." The shrill voices in effect rose and fell along the devious ways of a litany to Master Porges's household gods. Mention has already been made of his curiosity in these commodities. The present times he had judged to be times of crisis, big with fate. Who so apt as his newest saint to propitiate the hardy outlaw Galord de Born and the young Demoiselle de Bréauté? For the shocked soul of Borges had fled into religion as your only cure for a steam and a back cruelly scored. In such stresses as the present it still took wing to the same courts. Sancta Isolda, Genetricis Ancilla, went the choir. Ora, ora pro nobis. And then, Coe de coeles volitans, sacras manus agitans, foves in supplicis me ne extra greculo, tuo unus ferulo pereat invitiis. And so on. The youngsters sang with a good will, while Master Porges, as poet and man of piety, glowed in his skin. The verse limped. The Latin had suffered perhaps more violence than Latin should be asked to suffer even of a Christian. But what of that? It was the pietist's own, and as his people sang it they bore before his eyes the holy image of the saint trampling under her feet the hulking thief Prosper. And gaily they bore it, and gaily sang their unwitting way towards the unwitting couple of lovers who'd never let go hands until they were near enough to feel all eyes burn into them to read their secret. This was vastly well, but Master Porgus's present bent was towards policy. Her ladyship had advised with him in her new occasions. Sir Galord de Born, she had said, is a late enemy of mine, no longer to be feared. Since I have won back all my fiefs by the readiness and prudent discretion of the High Bailiff of WANMEETING. This good man had indeed made the most of his achievements, and reflecting that Prosper had gone alone to tackle Galore, whereof he was indubitably dead, and that it was a pity no one should be any the better for such a mishap, had told the whole story to his mistress, carefully leaving the hero's name out of account. For why, said the bailiff, cause a woman to shed unavailing tears? Remember, however, the Countess went on, that this Galore may be the escort of the Lady Pietosa de Breauté, my daughter, and your mistress, to her home. Pay him, then, the respect due to such an esquire, but no more. Receive from him my Lady Pietosa, and put yourself between her and him, yourself at her right hand and in the middle. She is not his, at the worst of all he is hers. Master Porgus bowed, observing, here was need of a high stroke of policy. Now policy to him meant mastery, and mastery, when it did not mean a drubbing, as it had done with Prosper, the greatest politician he'd ever known, meant a snubbing. With a cue from Prosper's handling of the science, Master Porgus thought he could show Galore, politically, his place. The white-robed throng of singers stopped with wondering simple faces before the great black knight and his rose-clad lady. Prosper doubtless looked grim. He hardly filled the headpiece of Galore. The white wicket gates, with many a dint across them, gleamed harshly from the coal-black shield. ENTRA permet had an uncompromising ring about it. His visor was down. He did not wish them to see a too good-humoured face until he had exacted a tribute. But Master Porgus cantered up with many a sweep of hand and cap to the lady. My lady, welcome to your halls and smiling goodly lands. We have done what honour we might. Your ladyship will read it for an earnest of our duties and goodwill. Thus Porgus. Isolde sat wondering, very much confused. She was coming in as a queen indeed. Master Porgus went on to handle the esquire. Master Galore, good day to you, he said. My lady, the Countess of HAUTERIVE, hath heard of you. She may possibly send for you anon. In the meantime, in the pendency of her motions to that grace, I am to receive from you the Lady Pietosa, who has suffered your attention so far, and who thanks you, through me, her inherited minister. At your ladyship's pleasure now. Follow us, good Master Galore. Unfortunately, Prosper saw no need for playing Galore just then, but the seneschal always pleased him. Master Porgus, he said in his suavest tones, the gentleman you name is indisposed to wait very long. He must not indeed be delayed, and is wholly incapable of travel unattended. He must therefore ride where I ride. As for the lady upon whom you bestow so decorous a name, I cannot answer. The lady whom I escort will please herself. Step behind us, Master Porgus, I entreat of you. You would not ask so much of Sir Galord de Born if you knew him as well as I do. Now who is this? What am I then, monsieur? The seneschal gasped. You are the most worshipful Master Porgus, if I am right, by the grace of God, seneschal of High March, and so forth. Ah, good. And you, sir? I am not Galord de Born, replied Prosper modestly, though he is not far removed from me. You bear his coat, monsieur. Ah, Saint Mary, I bear more than that of his. Messire, I have it in command, and I have it to command. Behind, sir, said Prosper shortly, and finally. Then he rode forward with their suit and met the minstrels. "My little singers," cried he, "sing your blithest now, and take us happily to the castle. Come, Love is lord of the land, master of maid and man, goeth in green with a ruddy face, heartening whom he can," and so on, and so on. The thing was a country catch which he had himself caught up from the High March maids. It went to a free, breathless measure, ran easily into a gallop, and must be jigged to. The fluttering cavalcade came skipping home, all save the boy who carried Sancta Isolda, and he at last tucked her under his arm and tripped with the rest. So it befell that the man of policy came in the rear. So also it befell that, when at the gates Prosper demanded his audience, Master Porges went in chastened with the message, and came back still more chapfallen to report that her ladyship, his mistress, would receive the messenger of Sir Galaor de Born at once, with the lady and his escort. Thus finally Prosper, with a suite behind him, stood in the great hall, and saw the Countess Isabel trembling on the dais. She came down the way left her by the assembled household, pale and misty with tears, to meet them. Prosper was softened at once, but before he could speak she was holding out her hands to him as a suppliant, striving to steady her voice. "Oh, Galaor," she began, "thou hast been my enemy declared for no fault of mine, and dreadful wrong hast thou done to many harmless folk who had never wronged thee. Yet if I had never won back what was mine, and still owed thee a living grudge, instead of a grudge for the unhappy dead, for the sake of her thou bringest me, I must receive thee here. Now give me that which thou didst promise. Let me see her." Prosper stood melted by the pent passion of the woman, but by her words stricken dumb. He understood that she should think him Galaor, and cared little if she did, for discovery must make his case the stronger. But what she wanted with a suit, and what Galaor had promised on her score, passed all comprehension. He thought he knew enough of the Countess to be sure she would not lightly forgive, yet here was the Countess asking to see the girl who had made a fool of her. Withal, her need was painfully plain. He therefore took his suite by the hand and led her forward. The Countess, shaking so that she could hardly stand, caught the girl from him, but she could not look at her, only steadied herself by clutching at her arms. "Let me see the token," says she in an eager whisper. So then Isoud unfastened her gown and took it out by its golden chain. The Countess received it in both hands as a relic, yet hand and head shook too much that she might see it. The poor lady held her wrist with the other hand, lifted it up near her face, then she blinked her eyes close to it. So for some time she remained, looking upon the jewel, but seeing nothing, seeming to love the feel of it in her hands, and crying all the while freely and noiselessly, with streams of tears down her cheeks. Next she dropped the crystal and took Isoud by the shoulders to peer in the same blind fashion into the girl's wondering eyes, and then at last, with a little smothered cry, she caught her to her bosom, straining her there with desperate hunger of affection, while her tears and passionate weeping shook and shuddered through her. In broken words, with sobs, half moaning prayers, and half crazy thanksgivings, she spoiled herself of the tenderness and frantic love a mother has, but no other under heaven. Commanding herself in time, she raised her marred face high above her daughter, who lay close in her arms, and turning to Prosper, said steadily enough, "Galaor, now declare thyself. Thou hast spoken so far the truth. This is my true daughter, Pietosa de Breaute, the daughter of my murdered lord, Fulk de Breaute, born in wedlock, and by me suffered to be stolen away by him who first stole my body, but never my soul, from my lord. Now ask of me, and I will give thee all, even to this treasure at my breast. Declare thyself." Prosper forgot everything but to blurt out his wonder. "Galaor, madam, Galaor, but I'm not Galaor, good lord. Oh," and he pulled up his visor, "look upon me, madam, and judge if I am Galaor." The Countess gasped, then blushed. All the household grew dumb. Master Porges went out suddenly into the air. The first to recover breath was the lady paramount. "Ah, my lord Prosper le Gai," she said, "in your revenge I see your father's son. Should I not have known? I am at your mercy, my lord. You've struck me hard at last, harder than before, but maybe not harder than I deserve." "Madam," said Prosper, It seems I have struck you harder and nearer than I knew, for your present joy has given me the most wondrous news that I ever had in the world. But the letter of Galore, was it not from you?" she cried out. "I know nothing of letters from Galore, Countess. When I write, it is in my own name." "There's mystery here. He wrote me of my daughter that he would bring her, and take her again. She has come, as he said, but where is Galore?" Prosper lifted on high the head of his enemy. "Here he is," said he. A timely diversion was caused here by a certain red-cheeked girl by name Milo. She had already proved the sharpness of her slow black eyes. She proved it now again by seeing, alone of all that company, the hounded page-boy in the Lady Pietosa de Breaute. After her first gape of rediscovery, being a girl of parts, conscious that generosity was afoot, she edged her way to the front, stooped suddenly and caught at the hem of the red silk robe to kiss it. "What is this, wench?" said the Countess, glad of the relief. Then said Milo on her knees, "My lady, I do this because I was the first who sinfully found out your ladyship's lady daughter, when she was here before like a boy, and I pray her pardon and yours, my lady, and yours again, messire, for the deadly sin I did." Red-cheeked Milo ran on glibly up to this point on a beaten track. All maidens of her class wallow in contrition, but when her words failed her, she sought a distressed lady's proper shelter and began to cry. Iseult stooped and caught her up before she could be stayed. She was too newly a countess, you see. "This is Roy's answer to thee, Milo," she laughed, and kissed the rogue. But for Isabel, long a countess otherwise, this unhappy lady felt herself whipped. Her abasement was now so deep, so desolately did she stand among her dependents, a naked woman spoiled of all her robes, that Prosper's honest heart smote him. "Countess," he said, smiling, "will you give me what Galore might have won?" But Iseult did better still. She came back to her mother's breast, put up her hand timidly, and touched the cold cheek. "Mother," was all she said. It was all the woman needed to cover her shame in a cloak of warm tears. The two wept together, and then Prosper knelt to his mother-in-law's hand. But the Countess was stronger than he had thought. In truth, she never spared herself any of her dignities. Her humility now became her admirably. Never was she more certainly the great lady of romance than when she led Prosper and Iseult to the dais, set them each on a throne, and then, turning to her people, opened her hands to them, her heart and her conscience. "Lo, you now," she cried out, "heed what I shall speak. This is the Lady Pietosa, called Iseult le Gay, my daughter indeed, countess after me of Hauterive, lady of Morgante and the Purlieu, whom I, unknowing and to my shame, despised and misused, unworthy mother that in trying to befoul the spotless but stained herself the deeper. And you, people, sheep of a hireling shepherd, followed in my ways and became as I am, most miserable in shame. If now I lead you aright, follow me also that road. You shall kneel, therefore, with me to the young countess and to the earl in her right, my lord Prosper." Before either could stop her, she was on her knees at her daughter's foot. Iseult dropped with a little cry, but the elder had her way. She kissed the foot, then stood by the throne to watch the homage paid. One by one they came sidling up. Milo was pushed into the front rank. Her shrewdness paid so much penalty. She knelt and laid her forehead on the ground. Iseult lightly set her foot on the bowed head, but he who watched the ceremony with dimmed eyes saw that the treader was the humblest there. Master Porges, flap-cheeked and stertorous, grovelled like a fat spaniel. Prosper came to the rescue as he swam up to the height of a man again, gasping for the air. "Ah, Seneschal," he said, "we each love honour, and ensue it after our fashion. We should be better acquainted." The Seneschal kissed his hand, and never doubted for one moment more but that Prosper was the pattern of knighthood. The image-maker at March was thereafter busy with the figure of one in the similitude of an archangel, under whom ran the legend, Properate vias eius. It is reported that he had a further commission for a great bronze Saint Isidore, destined to the chapel at High March. Days of festival followed, with jousting and minstrelsy. Iseult sat in green silk bower, clothed all in white, her black hair twisted with pearls, a crown of red roses upon all. The hooded falcon showed again on baldric and girdle, the fesse d'Anstey flickered on a new shield, the red plumes danced. "Bide the time," was the cry. After this came all the main lords to do homage for their lands, and among them was Malise le Gai, lord of Starning and Parax. Prosper, when the two met, laughed at him, made him angry, got forgiven, and shook hands. He thus put the man at his ease, and won a tolerable friendship with his brother against the time when the elder would be, in respect of certain fiefs, the vassal of the younger. But from GOLTRES came none to do fealty, nor from HAUTERIVE, nor from Malbank St. Thorn. GOLTRES, in fact, was escheat, and granted out to Prosper's brother Osric and his new wife from Pré. A new abbot was set over Holy Thorn, but the charter of pit and gallows was revoked by the countess. Withal, she said, "It was the granting of that charter which won me my child again. It does not appear that there is anything more to record." "What am I to call you, lady wife?" said Prosper, when he had her in his arms again. "Ah, Lord, thou shouldst know by now. Pietosa? Prosper. Iseult la désirée, if you must. Iseult la desirous? It would be true. What will you have then, child?" Ah, I will have that." It was, after all, but a rosy child that Prosper kissed. Explicit. End of chapter 36. Read by Sandra. End of The Forest Lovers by Maurice Henry Hewlett.